The tale opens on a battlefield soaked in blood and sorrow. Countless wars have left their scars here. The last man standing amidst the carnage is none other than our main character. Every single one of his allies perished in this brutal confrontation. He scanned the surroundings one final time. It was then he accepted the grim truth. This land would be their vast tomb. Gasping for air and barely holding on, he suddenly caught the sound of a voice. NC soon realized the voice belonged to their most feared adversary. He was stunned to find that this foe had survived. The being, adorned with multiple wings, was named Ahi, a monstrous giant that ravaged the battlefield. These colossal entities appeared just 20 days prior, wreaking havoc without warning or cause. Though humanity couldn't understand their motives, they fought with all their might to resist. RNC was enraged, directing all his hatred toward this creature for the Empire's downfall. It then told him his time was nearly up, that he would soon return to someone waiting for him. Despite his condition, the man bluffed, claiming the other two giants were also eliminated. The second one fell to a furious red dragon, incinerated by its fiery breath. The last giant, meanwhile, had been sealed eternally by a wise elder named Laura. Our protagonist gave a cunning smile, hoping to instill fear in the enemy. But the bluff failed. These giants could share their awareness across each other. You explained to the NC that the battles were not one-sided. Those who took down the giants perished along with them. That meant the world's mightiest protectors had all vanished. Still, NC refuted the claim. He was alive and willing to fight. But the giant saw through him. It knew his injuries were fatal and time was short. It added that if NC had realized his potential earlier and trained, he could have been their greatest threat. But regrets were pointless now. NC was aware of his flawed past and had no patience for its words. Yet, the giant commended him, acknowledging the impact of his actions. Still, it warned that all his struggle would be in vain. The world's doom was sealed. It proclaimed the coming of the starlight that would consume everything. But before it could say more, NC struck decisively, cutting off its head. The blow had enough power to behead the massive beast. With lifeless eyes, he gazed ahead, cold and resolute. He accepted that nothing could change the tragedies already done. As his adrenaline faded, pain rushed in, and his wounds overwhelmed him. Breathing became a struggle. Each inhale was labored. Memories of his first meeting with his team surfaced in his mind. A man with a distinct mark over his eye had been the first to approach. Others soon joined, warmly welcoming him into their fold. Together, they faced countless battles side by side. Now, not one of them remained. RNC questioned why they had come here, knowing how deadly it would be. Anger still burned in him, knowing their pride had driven them to this fate. It was reckless and now irreversible. What puzzled him most was how he, alone, managed to harm these beings. The Empire's mightiest blades couldn't even scratch them, but his sword pierced through. RNC lamented not realizing this sooner. He couldn't help but think many could have survived had he known. Lowering his head, he was overcome by a sense of loss and failure. Then, a soft, almost fading voice reached his ears. His instincts kicked in. He knew that voice. To his surprise, someone else had endured the massacre. He spotted a woman slumped against a massive stone, clearly wounded and weary. A sense of relief flooded him when he recognized the Grand Commander was still alive. This woman was Commander Edition, the leader of the mission to eliminate the giants. RNC, now known as Roman, joked about her condition, to which she responded with a jab of her own about his appearance. Edition asked Roman whether he had been bested. He replied that he was the one who struck down the monster. Tears welled in her eyes, grateful, relieved, and she thanked Roman from the bottom of her heart. Roman didn't expect to see the usually stoic commander show such emotion. Trying to lighten the atmosphere, he shifted the topic to a favor. Roman asked that all their fallen allies be given proper burials. In wars like this, bodies were often left to rot or burned without ceremony. But Edition expressed doubt. She was too injured to make that happen and thought Roman more fit to handle it. That belief crumbled when Roman started coughing violently. He confessed that even he might die at any moment. He had been putting on a brave face, but deep down, he knew the truth. Edition asked him what he would do if, by some miracle, he survived the day. Roman paused to think, and only one answer came to mind. He said he wanted to enroll at the academy. That giant's words haunted him, about how he'd never nurtured his powers, and that wish wasn't just his own. It was a dream of his late sister. She had always wanted him to study there, but to him it no longer mattered. He believed he would soon be reunited with her anyway. Edition tried to give him hope, saying that a rescue team was likely on the way. But Roman remained unconvinced. As they waited in quiet surrender, a radiant light suddenly broke through the clouds. Both of them instantly became alert. They noticed the storm clouds had vanished just as the light appeared. But then, a crushing pressure swept across the battlefield, suffocating and immense. Roman's eyes turned skyward, searching for answers, until he saw it. Above them hovered a giant with 8 mighty wings. And it wasn't alone. An entire horde of similar titans had arrived. These were the same beings responsible for nearly eradicating humanity. One of them was even narrating this tale. Now they had returned. Stronger, more numerous, and with grim purpose. Roman rose to his feet, troubled by one question. Where had these monsters come from? Audition's hopes crumbled. She had believed the defeat of the first 3 giants meant it was over, but she was wrong. This woman realized she had no way left to save the world, despite this being her 3rd attempt. Overwhelmed by despair, she found herself uncertain and without direction. But Roman's voice pulled her back to the present. He asked his commander to use her telekinetic powers. His blade alone couldn't reach those airborne titans. Audition stood in shock. She couldn't believe her subordinate was still willing to fight, despite the hopeless odds and countless enemies. Roman unsheathed his sword once more. He vowed to continue resisting, to repel these invaders no matter what. Audition saw that his spirit remained unbroken. That unwavering resolve sparked a flicker of hope within her. She began to believe. Perhaps Roman was the answer to defeating these beings once and for all. Then, with determination in her voice, Audition called out to him. Roman turned back to face his commander. She told him to stop speaking, and then did something completely unexpected. Confused, Roman stood frozen. He hadn't anticipated this move at all. The Grand Commander released a glowing blue orb from her mouth and passed it to Roman. He had no idea what it was meant for. She leaned in and whispered something directly into his ear. He tried to ask more, but she continued whispering without pause. When she finally stopped, Roman demanded to know what she had just done. But the moment he heard her final request, his expression changed entirely. She asked him, if they ever met again, to remind her to never do anything foolish and to stay a simple tailor. This last plea struck Roman deeply, just as the giants behind him began chanting a spell. And then, for the first and only time, he saw a warm, sincere smile on her face. A brilliant white light surged toward them with terrifying speed. The spell struck them directly. All that remained in its wake was the blue orb that Audition had passed to Roman. Shortly after, Roman opened his eyes again. But this time, his surroundings had completely changed. Blue skies above, and no corpses around him. Roman immediately searched for the Grand Commander, but she was nowhere to be seen. In front of him stretched peaceful meadows. He noticed a group of children playing by a stream, and in that moment he realized what had happened. He was back in Nimue, his hometown. This marked the first day of his return to the past. Still dazed, Roman clutched his aching head, trying to process it all. He began to understand. The Grand Commander's words had been true. Just before the giant's final spell hit, she had done something extraordinary. She gave him the blue orb. This orb had the power to rewind time itself. She had also confessed her own past, that before all this, she had simply been a humble tailor. But with the orb's power, she had regressed and risen to become the Empire's Grand Commander. The orb could only rewind time, and Audition had already used it 3 times. Audition had entrusted the orb to Roman so he could take the 4th and final chance. She believed that the power to defeat the giants lay within him, that he was the world's last hope. She whispered to him that this new beginning would give him the time he needed to truly master his abilities. It would also grant him the opportunity to fulfill his long-held dream of enrolling in the academy. She specifically recommended Selene Academy, a place filled with skilled individuals who could help him grow stronger. And as she'd said before, she had one final request for him. She asked that, should they ever meet again, he remind her to chase her old dream of simply being a tailor. Back in the present timeline, Roman was still struggling to make sense of everything. He thought it must all be a dream and tried to force himself awake. And if it was real, he had no idea what to do first. But as he wrestled with the reality of his situation, a powerful memory returned to him. He grabbed a nearby stick. Then, without wasting a second, he sprinted home. This was the moment he had longed for, the time when his sister was still alive. He dashed through the crowded streets, barely noticing the people around him, eager to see her once again. A joyful smile spread across his face. But then he noticed something that made him freeze. Just ahead, a group of boys was bullying someone. The victim had been suspended upside down, hanging helplessly. Roman immediately recognized the boys. He knew them from his previous life. Some things hadn't changed, even this far back. He considered ignoring it and continuing home, but something caught his attention. The boy wasn't hanging by a rope, he was being held in place by magic. Roman scanned the area, trying to locate the magic user. He knew that magic was rare and immensely valuable in warfare. That's when he spotted a red-haired boy nearby. He was the one casting the spell. The redhead seemed distressed, unsure how long he could maintain the spell. He knew that if it continued, it might seriously hurt the boy. The suspended child begged and pleaded, saying he had no money. He explained that his mother's medicine had drained all they had for the month. The bully with golden hair, clearly the group's leader, coldly replied that he didn't care about the boy's mother. He struck the boy without hesitation. He mockingly told him that if he truly cared about his mother, he should have earned more money. The other boys laughed, treating the entire scene like a joke. Then the golden-haired bully turned to the red-haired mage. He ordered him to lift the boy all the way to the top of a tree. The redhead hesitated, trying to object, but the leader refused to listen. If he didn't comply, he'd become the next victim. The bully even threatened him directly, intimidating him into obedience. The red-haired boy, whose name was revealed to be Cell, was visibly frightened. He wondered how things had ended up like this. It had all started with a simple desire to show everyone that he was good at magic. Now, as Cell's hands trembled, he wished he had the courage to say no. He was just about to tell them to quit when something suddenly halted him. A stick struck him. The blow came from Ronnie, who ordered his Cell to stop using magic because he had lost his concentration. The boy collapsed. The thug turned his rage toward the Cell. He prepared to redirect his fury at the red-haired boy, yet someone intervened before he could act. Ronan instructed his Cell to ignore the bully and speak with RNC instead. Using telekinesis, the stranger questioned his Cell about his origins, completely disregarding the angry one. This magic wielder explained that his power came from a cheap grimoire he got from a street vendor. RNC was stunned that such an impressive ability could stem from such a low-cost item. He thought it wise to observe this magic more, as it could be a valuable tool in his battle against the giants. However, a familiar sound pulled him out of his thoughts. Roman noticed the guy had unsheathed a sword, furious at being continually ignored. The thug charged straight at RNC, but Roman didn't feel alarmed by the sight of a youngster wielding a real weapon. He even questioned where this boy had gotten the long blade and noticed his awkward stance. Since the bully lacked power and skill, his swing missed our protagonist completely. What shocked everyone was how effortlessly Roman dodged the strike. Despite being in a younger body, Roman realized one thing had remained: the combat instincts he had mastered in his former life. The golden-haired bully tried to save face, telling Ryan he got lucky and he'd be spared. This time, all Ryan had to do, he claimed, was show some respect. His mockery was bad enough, but he crossed the line when he mentioned Ron and sister. He threatened that he'd make her suffer and promised she wouldn't survive today. Fed up, Roman swiftly struck the bully with the wooden stick he held. A stream of blood followed the swift retaliation, as the precise blow had cleanly sliced through the ear. A few moments passed before the bully grasped what had just occurred. He dropped his sword and howled in agony. The rest of his gang backed off in fear. Ronan approached the wounded thug, his expression cold and composed. It was then the bully finally realized the magnitude of his mistake. Everyone watching knew who the victor was. Though they wanted to help their leader, fear of Ronan kept them frozen. Our protagonist had torn an ear off with nothing but a wooden rod. Ronan then turned his attention to the rest of the group. He warned them to flee unless they wanted to suffer their boss's fate. But before they bolted, he demanded they return all the cash they had stolen. Knowing they couldn't win, the group obeyed without hesitation. In a short while, the boy was handed back his stolen money. He admitted to RNC that this was far more than what was taken from him. However, Ronan insisted the boy keep all the money, saying he had no use for it. Deeply moved, the boy thanked both Ronan and the Cell sincerely. Meanwhile, the Cell stood quietly beside them, not joining in the conversation. He turned to the boy and offered an apology. He explained that fear had paralyzed him, making him obey the bullies. SL continued expressing his regret, leaving the poor boy momentarily at a loss for words. The boy then shared that he had always understood the Cell's situation. With a gentle smile, he reassured the magic user that none of it was truly his fault. The Cell's apology, he added, meant a lot to him. After that, the boy bid farewell to Ronan and the Cell. Now, only the two of them remained. Ronan and C turned their attention to the Cell with curiosity. To them, this person didn't quite seem like a typical boy. Roland thought the same and even referred to the cell as she. Then Ronan shifted the topic to the real reason he wanted to speak with the cell. He asked the cell to return to this same spot in 4 days. Though the cell tried to ask more questions, Ronan didn't give any answers. Just before leaving, R and C warned the cell there would be consequences for not showing up. And with that, the cell was left standing alone. For now, we'll continue calling the cell a he, though it's quite likely this was actually a girl. Sometime later, our protagonist arrived at their home. He had even brought a bouquet for his sister, remembering her fondness for that flower. Embarrassed, he almost threw the bouquet away. Fortunately, his sister noticed him and opened the door just in time. Her voice froze him in place. He had no idea what to say. After all, in his past life, she had passed away, and he'd often wondered what he'd say if he saw her again. Her loss had been one of his greatest regrets. But this time, fate had given him a second chance. She now stood in front of him, beaming brightly and welcoming him home early. With his emotions tangled, all Roman could manage was to say he was back. She immediately rushed to prepare dinner for him. She laughed and teased him, surprised that he'd ever bring her flowers. Her name was Errol. Errol's joy was clear. The simple gesture had truly touched her. Roman then curiously asked her age this year and learned she was already... He needed that detail to help him figure out where they were in the current timeline. RNC estimated that around 10 years remained before the giants would descend upon their world. Errol approached him, checking his forehead, sensing that something about him felt different today. Yet she was exactly how he remembered her, full of warmth, light, and kindness. He silently wished he could freeze this moment and live in it forever. But the thought jolted him back to something important. He looked at her seriously and told her he needed to share something. He revealed to his sister his plan to join the academy. At first, Errol was too stunned to respond. But once it sunk in, her whole face lit up with excitement. She felt genuinely overjoyed hearing this dream come straight from her brother's mouth. Errol dashed deeper into the house with excitement. She began rummaging through their things, tossing items aside as she searched for something she had saved for this very moment. Eventually, she pulled out a rather large pot. Rohan curiously peeked inside. It was clearly something meant just for him. The container was filled to the brim with coins, a hidden stash Errol had quietly saved to support his academy plans. Rohan was stunned by this unexpected gesture. He thanked her sincerely but explained that even this generous amount wouldn't be enough. He then shared the name of the school he aimed to enter. The prestigious Imperial School, Selene Academy. Errol's face turned from proud to puzzled in an instant. Then she screamed, realizing the weight of what her brother was aiming for. The Selene Academy was revered as the top institution in the entire empire. It boasted elite scholars from across the globe and enjoyed massive support from the imperial family. Some even called it the Hero Forge. Grand Commander Edition had once walked its halls. It was also where the legendary swordmaster Siphon trained, and even the infamous criminal Winter was a former student. Despite their vastly different paths, all these individuals made significant contributions during the war with the giants. And the school had been strongly recommended by Edition herself. Of course, the biggest obstacle was the school's sky-high tuition and nearly impossible entrance criteria. But our MC wasn't going to back down, especially not when his sister was so proud and supportive of him. This gave him all the motivation he needed to prove himself and gain admission. However, before he could focus on that dream, he ran into an unexpected person. It was the cell again. Rohan jokingly called them May Cell, but was quickly corrected. The red-haired one had shown up, concerned over the threatening words Rohan had said earlier, though he hadn't meant them seriously. Now that the cell was here, Rohan told him there was something important to do tonight. A trial awaited. The cell looked confused, completely unprepared for any sort of test. Rohan clarified. He wanted the cell to demonstrate his telekinetic skill on him. Specifically, he asked to be levitated as high as the cell could manage. The cell hesitated, warning that this type of spell could be dangerous. But Rohan reassured him, if done carefully, he'd be completely fine. With a nod, the cell began channeling his magic. He invoked a spell named Invisible Hand, directing its force toward Rohan. Rohan was visibly surprised as the energy wrapped around his body. Slowly, his feet lifted off the ground. Within moments, Rohan was soaring into the air, his excitement building. It reminded him of the sensation he felt while battling giants, though not quite at that level of power yet. Still, this telekinesis, paired with his own unusual abilities, could be the key to standing toe-to-toe with the giants again. Rohan grinned, surprised that he had already found someone willing to help him on his path so early on. This cell had just turned into the most valuable ally in his looming war with the giants. But after a few more seconds, the cell began to lose grip over his spell. Still, our main character urged him to hold on just a bit longer. He had one more thing to test. RNC unsheathed his weapon. He swung it through the air in a clean arc. Instantly, the cell was stunned at what unfolded before his eyes. He realized Rohan had sliced straight through the mana, cutting the telekinetic hold itself. When Rohan touched down, the cell immediately questioned him about the move. He'd never seen anyone sever mana like that. But Rohan couldn't give a proper explanation either. Even he didn't understand how it worked. He figured this strange power must be tied to the mystery surrounding his abilities. Something he still needed to investigate. For now, his best guess was that the sword itself could disrupt magical energy. But he decided not to rush solving that puzzle yet. There were more pressing matters at hand. After concluding the test, Roman told the cell that he had passed. He handed him an extra bag he'd brought along, saying they had one more task to complete before sunrise. This moment was monumental. It would later be seen as the opening chapter in Rohan's personal legend. The duo resumed their journey together. Along the way, the cell was briefed about Rohan's plan to apply to Philin Academy. He tried to verify the claim. After all, that academy was reserved for the elite of the Empire. Annoyed by the constant doubting, our MC confirmed it again and told him to stop asking. But then Rohan turned the question around. Did the cell want to join the academy too? The cell admitted he did, but he believed he lacked talent and courage, and knew he was often too timid to do anything bold. Our MC cut him off, asking if he truly wanted to live that way forever. This blunt question struck the cell deeply, making him reflect on how he was squandering his potential. Rohan didn't sugarcoat things. He agreed that the cell had flaws. He pointed out that the cell often cried easily and let fear control him. Still, none of that mattered. What did matter was that he still had the power to change. Rohan reminded him that time was the most precious thing in this world. Once gone, it could never be recovered. If the cell didn't take action now, he'd someday be overwhelmed with regret. Every word Rohan said came from the heart. He knew the pain of regret too well. His past life was marked by missed chances and sorrow. Then he asked the cell directly. Was he ready to change starting today? Meanwhile, from the cell's viewpoint, he had never imagined that Rohan cared so deeply about his future. But since he gave no response, RNC simply turned and continued walking on. That's when the cell finally spoke up. He said this was what he had been waiting for. He wanted to change, and he was ready to go with Roman to Philin. Our MC turned to him and said this was the first time he had actually sounded like a man. But in truth, Roman had been orchestrating this from the beginning. Anyone could tell from the expression on his face. Later that evening, their first mission officially began. The cell was visibly shaken after Rohan finished briefing him. Now, the two of them were stationed in hiding, watching closely. This would be the first real test the cell had to overcome. Roman had brought him face to face with his initial target for growth, the notorious lunar goblins. At the moment, the monsters were fast asleep. Roman seemed to glow with anticipation. He truly believed this was the ideal moment to put their plan into motion. He even gave the cell a look that said everything. It's time. Lunar goblins were a special type of creature often found in these parts. They were distinguishable from ordinary goblins by their yellowish skin. But their defining trait was their obsession with gold and shiny objects. These goblins frequently ambushed traders just to loot their cargo and valuables. After hoarding their riches, they'd stash them in one place and throw elaborate parties, usually on nights when the moon was full. And just as Roman predicted, the goblins they spotted that night were celebrating under a full moon. The cell began to tremble, realizing what their mission actually entailed. Rohan then revealed the plan. They were going to steal the goblins' treasure. This threw the cell off. He'd never even heard of lunar goblin parties before. He asked Rohan how he knew about all this, but our MC couldn't give a real answer. It was knowledge from his past life. He wrapped an arm around the cell, telling him to use telekinesis to quietly move all the treasure into their bags. But the cell pushed back, saying it wasn't that simple. One wrong move and the goblins would wake up. That was the one thing they had to avoid at all costs. The cell pleaded with Rohan to rethink the strategy, but Roman simply accused him of being scared again. Then Rohan began explaining why they had to make this mission work. There were two things they needed to gain admission into Philin Academy. The first was enough money to pay the hefty tuition fees. The second was genuine combat experience. He reminded the cell that the nobles attending that school had been trained since birth. If they wanted to compete on equal ground, this was their only option. Rohan was convinced that putting their lives on the line was the fastest way to grow. The lunar goblins offered the perfect opportunity. This mission would get them both money and training in one go. The cell couldn't argue. He just began to cry, realizing that everything Rohan had said made perfect sense. So with a resigned nod, he began channeling his telekinesis spell. The night remained still and undisturbed. In that deep silence, the treasures were quietly being moved, piece by piece. Rohan's and the cell's bags were steadily filling up. The items being moved now were the last remaining valuables in the goblin's chest. So the cell focused with all his might, not wanting to slip up at the final moment. Our MC grinned as he saw the operation succeed. The treasures had been transferred smoothly. The glow from inside their bags lit up slightly, showing how full they were. Both bags were packed. The mission was already proving to be worth it. Rohan complimented the cell on a job well done, though deep down, he had always believed the cell was capable of pulling it off. At that moment, he slipped and called the cell she again. He even thought to himself that this girl was performing better than expected. His cheerful expression shifted to a mischievous smirk. He realized he had just acquired a very capable minion. Without wasting time, Rohan started gathering their things. The mission was complete. He told the cell it was time to head back. They needed to move fast, before anything went wrong. But it was as if Rohan's words summoned trouble, because something stirred in the woods. Two figures came sprinting through the forest, seemingly chasing after something. They were both trying to capture a bird. The shouting from those two echoed loudly, alerting Rohan and the cell. They both turned in confusion, wondering who these loud strangers were that just disturbed the peace. The ruckus was enough to wake the goblins. The goblin leader rushed to their treasure chest and was horrified to find it empty. Panic set in as he confirmed the theft. Without hesitation, he roused the rest of the goblin horde. It all happened so fast. Within seconds, they held a quick meeting. As they tried to figure out where their gold had gone, something caught their eye. They spotted two humans attempting to sneak away. Rohan immediately realized they'd been caught. The goblins charged at them without delay. The cell completely lost his composure. Fear paralyzed him. He collapsed to the ground, unable to move. In contrast, Rohan remained calm and collected. He wasn't about to flee or toss their loot away just because of some monsters. After all, without that treasure, they had no way of paying for their academy tuition. The goblins were quickly closing the distance. Still, Rohan kept adjusting and checking his sword. He noted that the blade was forged from low-grade steel. But even so, he believed it could withstand at least 15 strikes. The catch was that there were about 30 goblins charging at them. The cell could do nothing but watch helplessly as the creatures advanced. He even shouted out to warn Rohan. But to Rohan, 15 strikes would be more than enough. With a sweeping slash, he cut down 3 goblins in a single blow. Their heads were cleanly severed from their bodies. The cell was in total shock witnessing the brutality. Calmly, Rohan noted he still had 14 attacks remaining. In the distance, crows shrieked and fluttered through the trees, disturbed by the violence. The lunar goblins were completely wiped out by a lone human. Rohan had taken down every single monster. The cell found it hard to believe. It seemed utterly impossible. But his eyes told the truth. Rohan had truly done it. He vividly remembered that first strike from Rohan that instantly brought down 3 goblins. As for the rest that followed, he recalled how Rohan vanished for a short moment, and then, one after another, the goblins dropped, many with limbs severed. Rohan had shown off an incredible mastery of the blade. These creatures never stood a chance against our protagonist. The cell couldn't help but think he had just witnessed the brilliance of a true prodigy. Rohan snapped him back to focus, reminding him not to zone out like that. Then, with a grin, Rohan told him to get ready. It was time to head home. The night was still young as the two made their way back. But the treasure-laden bags they carried were growing heavier by the step. Rohan complained that his muscles were sore after the brief but intense fight. He even decided to start a tougher training regimen the next day to strengthen his body. The cell brought up the strange sound that had startled both them and the goblins, asking Rohan what it was. But he had no idea either, and he was still irritated that the noise had ruined their flawless plan. He grumbled about how insane someone must be to scream like that in the middle of the night. But just as things calmed and they walked peacefully, an arrow was aimed at them. A moment later, it was released. The arrow was flying straight at the cell. He noticed it, but by then it was too close to dodge. Fortunately, Rohan snatched the arrow midair before it could strike. The cell was shaken as he realized how close he had come to serious injury if Rohan hadn't stepped in. Without wasting time, Rohan began scanning the surroundings. He spotted two figures nearby, one of them holding a bow. Rohan was instantly furious when they mockingly referred to them as kids. The two strangers walked toward them, and one even apologized for firing the arrow. He claimed they had heard something suspicious and thought monsters were nearby. But while making excuses, his gaze lingered on the treasure bulging from Rohan's bag. The two exchanged a strange look. It was as if they were communicating silently. Rohan didn't buy their act and refused to accept the apology. He knew something was off. With a serious tone, he told them to drop the act. Now with a hardened expression, Rohan demanded to know who they really were. The two men hadn't expected such a direct challenge from these kids. The one with the bow began stepping toward Rohan casually, trying to make small talk while subtly preparing a concealed weapon. Then suddenly, he dropped the pretense. He introduced himself as a member of Calabro and attacked with a quick swing aimed at Rohan. But Rohan recognized that name. Calabro meant something to him. Without hesitation, he grabbed the attacker's wrist mid-swing, halting the strike. Rohan swiftly retaliated. His punch landed hard enough to knock the man out cold. The second man saw his companion fall and immediately charged forward. The cell quickly caught onto his movement. He activated his telekinesis and called out to Rohan, and just in time, he unleashed his spell directly at the attacker. The man froze in place, completely unable to move, confused by the sudden paralysis. This brought a satisfied smile to Rohan's face. He was genuinely impressed with the cell's quick reaction. Wasting no time, Rohan took full advantage of the moment and disarmed the frozen foe. The enemy's dagger slipped out of his grip and landed cleanly into Rohan's hand. Without hesitation, Rohan used it to end the fight. The man was stunned. He didn't even understand what just occurred. His body couldn't react fast enough to defend itself. A piercing scream echoed through the forest. The cell asked if their opponent had been killed, and Rohan confirmed it. He had no intention of sparing someone who aimed to kill them. He added that these two attackers were members of a group called Calabro. That name carried weight. They were infamous for a long list of crimes and known as the most vicious poachers in the Empire. Rohan made it clear that eliminating them was necessary. If they hadn't acted, it would have been their organs up for harvest. And considering they now knew the poachers' identities, letting them escape would have been a crime itself. As they prepared to leave, Rohan sensed something nearby. They noticed a bag nearby starting to twitch and move on its own. Assuming it might contain a poached animal, the two cautiously approached it. Rohan opened the bag, and a pair of fierce eyes stared right back at him. A moment later, the creature inside leapt out and took to the air. A small blue flying animal was now hovering above them. Rohan couldn't believe what he was seeing. He blurted out in disbelief, wondering what kind of chicken this was. But it wasn't a chicken. It was a small, charming bluebird. The cell was completely baffled. He'd never seen a creature like this before. Rohan admitted it was new to him too. As the bird floated in front of them, Rohan noticed a strange shackle attached to its leg. He instantly recognized it as a Boris poacher's shackle, designed to disrupt a creature's mana and suppress its movements. Rohan recalled that these restraints were reserved for very rare creatures, often used during special hunts. That realization triggered another. A voice began to speak from the bird, and a magical circle appeared above its head. Seconds later, the voice became distinct. It said a connection had finally been established. The unexpected event made both of them step back. The cell was visibly shaken. A talking bird? But Rohan explained it was just communication magic. Looking back at the bag the bird had been trapped in, Rohan speculated that it was likely enchanted to suppress mana. Suddenly, the figure behind the voice appeared. A mysterious man named Varun, who introduced himself as a researcher studying fantastical beasts at the academy. Varun told Rohan and his cell that the bluebird's name was Morpheus, and that it had taken quite some time to re-establish a connection with it. He then asked the pair who they were. Rohan simply replied that they were just travelers passing through. RNC went on to explain that they had just dealt with a couple of poachers. He added that these same poachers had been responsible for abducting someone named Marcus. Rohan considered telling the full story of how he saved the bird, but he hesitated. There had been too much violence and it didn't seem appropriate to go into detail with Varun. So, he kept it brief and simply said they managed to rescue Marcus from the poachers. Varun hadn't expected anyone to target his rare creature. Grateful, he admitted he now owed Rohan though he wasn't sure how to repay the debt. Rohan assured him that no repayment was necessary. He was more concerned about getting Marcus safely back to Varun. The bird looked exhausted. RNC asked whether Marcus was still able to fly, assuming the shackle could be removed. Varun confirmed it. He said Marcus had incredible instincts and would easily find his way back once unrestrained. With a smooth motion, Rohan drew his sword and made a swift cut, shattering the shackle that bound Marcus's leg. He then looked into the bird's blue eyes and instructed it to return to its rightful home, sensing its concern. From the bird's perspective, Rohan appeared radiant, and its eyes sparkled as if enchanted. But just before flying off, Marcus did something odd. It began nudging toward Rohan, acting agitated. He wasn't sure what it meant. Varun explained that the bird wanted Rohan to pluck one of its feathers, a sign that it wished to see its savior again. The feather would serve as a magical beacon. After that, Marcus spread its wings and soared into the sky. Varun offered his gratitude and hoped the two would visit sometime. Marcus flew at an incredible speed, a joyful smile on its face as it made its way back home. Rohan couldn't believe how fast the bird moved. Just then, the cell noticed something and pointed it out to Rohan. That prompted Rohan to shift his gaze to his own hand. He and the cell both stared at it in bewilderment. Neither of them could identify what the mysterious object in Rohan's hand was. A few days later, Rohan and the cell arrived at a bustling caravan site. Traders were busy loading and unloading goods for exchange and transport. Among them was an older man closely examining a jewel. His name was Duan Carabel, the head of the Carabel Merchant Guild. He was impressed by the gem's clarity and craftsmanship and offered 20 gold for it. Other items were being inspected too. Duan said luck was clearly on his side today. The sellers were none other than Rohan and the cell, finally selling the treasure they had collected from the goblin raid. RNC was glad to find someone giving a fair deal. In contrast, every other merchant they'd met so far had tried to cheat them by offering unfairly low prices. Rohan warmly clasped Mr. Duan's hand, instantly forging a bond of mutual admiration. As their discussion neared its close, Rohan reached into his coat, eager to test the old man's appraisal skills with one final item. Rohan revealed a peculiar egg, its shell shimmering with cosmic hues, prompting Mr. Duan to examine it closely. The egg, it was revealed, hailed from a corpus, a remnant left behind by the enigmatic entity. A strange, potent energy radiated from the egg, leaving Rohan puzzled about its true nature. Initially, both men mistook the egg for a bluebird's droppings, a gift for their kindness. Annoyed by the thought, Rohan's companion, frustrated, hurled the egg at a massive boulder. The collision obliterated the rock, yet the egg remained unscathed, not even scratched. Rohan and his friend stood in awe, stunned by the extraordinary scene before them. Back in the present, Mr. Duan continued his meticulous inspection of the mysterious egg. Rohan waited patiently, confident that this item held far greater value than it seemed. The old appraiser focused intently, beginning to form theories based on the egg's appearance. Rohan's excitement grew, hopeful that the mystery of the egg was about to be unraveled. His optimism faded when Mr. Duan dismissed the egg as mere horse dung. Rohan rejected the claim, and Mr. Duan admitted he was clueless about the egg's true identity. He suggested that Rohan and his companion seek a specialized appraiser for further evaluation. This advice sparked Rohan's curiosity further, convincing him to hold onto the egg for now, while his friend still wondered if it was just hardened droppings. Shifting topics, Rohan inquired if Mr. Duan had any books about Filion Academy for sale. He explained that they were preparing for the Academy's entrance exam and lacked knowledge about it, delighting Mr. Duan with their timely visit. The old man shared that his daughter was also preparing for the same exam and could likely assist them. Moments later, a young woman appeared, asking her father what was happening. Mr. Duan informed Rohan and his friend that his daughter had arrived, prompting them to turn and see her. The blonde woman, Maria Carabel, was introduced as Mr. Duan's only child. Her name immediately captured Rohan's attention, drawing his full focus. He stared at Maria, noting her striking green eyes and sharp, elegant features. Mr. Duan presented Rohan and his companion as clients who had just finalized a significant deal. Maria's blunt demeanor earned a quick reprimand from her father. Apologizing, Mr. Duan explained that Maria's rough speech stemmed from growing up in the world of trade. Rohan's friend brushed off the incident, but Rohan himself began to step away. Approaching Maria, he boldly asked if she was truly Maria, seeking confirmation of her identity. She affirmed she was Maria, even revealing her middle name, Sen, and grew curious about how Rohan knew such details. Meanwhile, Rohan's mind wandered, lost in thoughts of someone from his past who bore a striking resemblance to the woman before him. The issue was that the person Rohan remembered had a distinctly different physique. Deciding to clarify his suspicions, Rohan asked Maria to lean in for a private question. Curious, Maria stepped closer, eager to hear what Rohan was about to whisper. With surprising bluntness, he quietly asked if she had a penis. Maria, taken aback, stared at him, thinking the question was utterly ridiculous. Yet Rohan's earnest expression made it clear he wasn't joking. After a moment of stunned silence, Maria processed the absurdity of what she'd just heard. Rohan doubled down, insisting that no matter how he looked, she didn't seem to have one, further irritating her. Still pondering other possibilities to explain his confusion, Rohan barely noticed a vague shape approaching. It was Maria's hand, swiftly smacking him as she told him to hush. Unable to dodge, Rohan felt a familiar sting from the slap, echoing a sensation from his past. Gazing at Maria again, her resemblance to his old comrade, Count Mary, became undeniable. Flashing back, Rohan recalled meeting Mary's kin in Merlin, where he served as a disciplinary soldier and Mary managed supplies. Their bond had been strong, thanks to Mary's laid-back nature, and Rohan had always found her remarkable. However, Mary would get unusually upset whenever soldiers discussed crude topics like genitals. Rohan's companion also noted Mary's habit of swatting people when annoyed. Back then, Rohan's curiosity about Mary's reactions went unanswered due to unforeseen events. Mary had perished in a war against angels, long before Rohan met his own fate. Returning to the present, Rohan grinned, realizing the truth about Maria's identity. Maria's behavior made sense. She was a woman, though the soldiers had mistaken her for a man. Seeing Rohan smile, Maria grew more irritated and approached to teach him a lesson. But Rohan's companion intervened, swatting her head to halt her advance. Rohan urged Maria to calm down, noting she'd already struck him once. He admitted his question was out of line, allowing her the earlier slap. Undeterred, Maria lunged again, delivering a fierce headbutt. The two began brawling like children squabbling over a toy. Mr. Dewan and Rohan's companion watched in disbelief, unable to intervene immediately. As the fight persisted, they finally stepped in to separate the squabbling pair. Later, inside a tent, both Rohan and Maria had calmed down. Rohan's companion looked puzzled, trying to make sense of the scene. He marveled at how quickly Rohan and Maria acted like old friends after their earlier clash. Meanwhile, Rohan and Maria continued their lively conversation, engrossed in their discussion. Their conversation turned to weaponry, with Maria offering insights on wielding them effectively. She questioned why Rohan carried 3 swords and a magic wand. Rohan explained that his heavy swordplay demanded backups in case one broke. Examining the trio, Maria declared the black iron sword superior. She noted that black iron's durability made it a favorite among renowned knights. Maria assured Rohan his black iron sword was unbreakable, a revelation to him, as it had always been his preferred weapon. She pointed out its embedded magic stone, then shifted focus to the other 2 swords. Turning to Rohan's companion, Maria asked if he was the rare mage Rohan mentioned, and he nervously confirmed. When he revealed his telekinesis magic, Maria was stunned, recognizing its rarity. She remarked that such a skill could easily earn him a scholarship. Maria then warned Rohan that he was the weak link for the upcoming practical exam, asking what unique techniques he planned to showcase. Unaware of this requirement, Rohan learned from Maria that applicants needed to impress professors with their capabilities. She stressed that excelling in the practical could outweigh a poor theory exam. But failure to prove worth meant forgetting the academy. Rohan sighed, thinking swordsmanship alone should suffice for a swordsman. They discussed typical practical exam displays, often involving family secret techniques. Maria added that some showcased personal mana-based combat skills, prompting Rohan to interrupt with confusion about mana. Shocked, Maria explained that mana mastery was a basic requirement for Filion Academy aspirants. Rohan's blank expression revealed his ignorance of the exam's fundamental prerequisites. Maria, trembling with disbelief, realized Rohan couldn't even sense his own mana. Her suspicion was confirmed when he confused mana with something else, leaving her incredulous. Frustrated, she facepalmed, stunned that someone so unprepared aimed for Filion Academy. Rohan, defensive, insisted he might understand what she meant. Maria stood abruptly, ordering him outside, leaving him puzzled. Borrowing 2 short swords from the table, she explained her own blade was at the blacksmith. The protagonist grew frustrated, fearing Mary might harm his prized blades, Yet she assured him she'd complete her task before any damage could occur. Mary promised Rowan triple compensation if she damaged his swords, leaving the hero exasperated, knowing he was powerless to stop her. Urging Rowan to step outside quickly, Mary revealed her plan to train him specially in this realm. In this world, mana flows as the essence of nature's power, omnipresent yet elusive, accessible only to those with the ability to harness it. To wield mana, one must first perceive and sense it, a foundational skill known as mana sense. Achieving mana sense demands rigorous, precise training, often requiring intense dedication. Typically, it takes a full year of effort for someone to develop the ability to detect mana. Those who master mana sense at a young age often seek admission to the prestigious Filion Academy. This fundamental knowledge was now being imparted to the main character. Mary warned Rowan that he couldn't hope to intervene if he failed to distinguish between mana and aura. Now outdoors, both were armed and ready, poised for the training ahead. Mary elaborated, explaining that aura is a distinct form of mana, though the gap between them remains vast. Aura, she clarified, is the potent innate energy unlocked through grueling effort and enlightenment. The blonde instructor asked Rowan if he was following her explanations. From the protagonist's viewpoint, he recalled facing numerous aura users in his past life, each wielding extraordinary abilities. Those foes were formidable and vexing, yet their skills left a lasting impression on him. Despite their remarkable powers, those aura users were ultimately bested by Rowan. Mary's voice snapped him back to the present, urging him to begin their training session. She insisted that physical practice would teach him faster than mere intellectual understanding. Rowan underestimated Mary, dismissing her as a young girl, paying little heed to her words. In a flash, the blonde closed the distance between them, her astonishing speed catching him off guard. The hero's eyes widened in shock as he registered the sudden assault. Though unprepared, Rowan managed to parry Mary's strike, but he was clearly at a disadvantage. His gaze fixed on Mary, recognizing something familiar in her demeanor. That fierce look in her eyes mirrored one he'd seen in a distant memory. The two engaged in a fierce duel, their swordsmanship skills nearly equal in prowess. Rowan was stunned by Mary's strength at such a young age, noting her ability to wield dual blades with finesse. He pondered whether Mary was already tapping into mana, as she'd described, but his inability to sense it left him uncertain. From Mary's perspective, she was astonished by Rowan's resilience. She had intended to end the spar quickly, yet despite using mana, Rowan held his ground, prolonging the bout. Mary aimed to teach Rowan the sting of defeat now, sparing him greater humiliation during the Filion Academy entrance exam. Her tough approach rooted in care, yet all her strategies crumbled spectacularly. She found herself retreating, outmaneuvered. She never imagined someone oblivious to mana could wield such formidable power. Still reeling from the confusion, she was caught off guard when Ronan posed a question. He inquired about her opinion of his performance, deflecting her blade with ease in the same breath. A fierce glint in his eyes accompanied the move, while she was already scheming to end the duel swiftly. Ronan issued a stern warning to Maria: evade his next strike and never attempt to parry it. Fortunately, Maria's instincts kicked in at his words. She stepped back nimbly, narrowly avoiding the blow. That attack could have been her undoing, nearly stealing her life in an instant. With a wry grin, she remarked that Ronan's strike could have spelled serious trouble for her. At that moment, she realized Ronan was no ordinary youth. The announcer mirrored her sentiment, echoing the same observation back. Ronan noted Maria's raw talent, even without relying on mana, though her lack of balance and clumsiness held her back. He advised that correcting her stance would elevate her skills significantly. As Ronan turned to leave, Maria halted him. Still indignant, she shouted that their clash wasn't over, but he seemed utterly disinterested. As he spoke, fine cracks began spiderwebbing across Maria's sword. She stood dumbfounded, unable to fathom what had just occurred. The blade she'd used against Star and CE now lay shattered. Her eyes widened in shock as she pondered when her weapon had sustained such critical damage. Ronan, meanwhile, reminded her of her wager. She'd replace the swords if he bested her. Maria opened her mouth to protest, but someone else caught her attention. It was Assel, who commended her effort against Ronan, his expression hinting he understood her turmoil. Ronan called out to Assel, signaling it was time to rest, and Assel promptly joined him. Maria was left standing alone, grappling with the enigma that was Ronan. The pair departed, making their way to their quarters. The following day, Ronan and Assel returned to the merchant's hub to claim the sword Maria had promised. But as Ronan reached for it, something puzzled him. He asked Maria about the items before him. Besides the promised swords, Maria had included a set of books, her own condensed notes for the upcoming academy entrance exam. She explained they'd need these materials, with the exam just a month away. Aisel's eyes gleamed, but Ronan pressed Maria on her motives. Suspicious, he warned her against any tricks. Maria reassured him, saying she'd simply grown fond of them. She added that her goal was to see all three admitted to the academy, and the extra resources came at no cost. Maria wished she could mentor them herself, but her merchant lifestyle, constantly traveling for trade, made it impossible. The woman lightly tapped her fist against Roman's and wished him success, urging him to study diligently on his own. With a playful grin, she cautioned that she'd hold him accountable if he didn't pass the exam. Roman grinned back, saying she didn't need to go out of her way and should focus on her own path instead. Moments later, Maria was seated in a carriage, calling out to Roman in his cell that she'd meet him at the imperial capital for the exam. They clasped hands, exchanging heartfelt goodbyes with her. Amidst it all, Roman stood lost in his thoughts, the world around him swirling in hues of white. In his mind, he knew he had to strengthen his frail body and dive into his studies, tasks unfamiliar from his past life. Yet, preparing for this new journey didn't feel burdensome. It marked the dawn of his transformed fate. Back home, Roman's days resumed their rhythm, though tinged with subtle changes. Unlike before, he now shared every meal with his sister Errol, a small but meaningful shift. He savored each bite, eating heartily, relishing moments he'd missed in his previous existence. With the energy from his feasts, he burned off the calories by hunting monsters around the village. This routine proved effective, boosting his endurance and physical resilience. Our hero had come far since his return to this time. His efforts even wiped out every monster near the village, leaving none behind. Beyond hunting, he dedicated hours to studying. Such scholarly pursuits were unthinkable when he was merely a soldier. Though uncertain of the outcome, he vowed to give his all to this new endeavor. A month later, the story's stage was set. This grand destination was the imperial capital Pawan. At its heart stood the empire's premier academy, nestled within the miniature city of the White Tower. Roman stood before the towering structure, awestruck, barely believing his eyes. It felt surreal, like a dream, as he stepped into the famed Filling Academy. Still marveling, he recalled texts describing the city as a masterpiece in its own right, and the sight confirmed it. His reverie was interrupted by a familiar voice, cutting through his daze. You can guess who. The voice teased him for gawking like a rural newcomer and urged him to head inside. Roman was relieved to see this familiar figure but noticed something striking. In just a month, Roman's presence radiated newfound strength and confidence. Rohan, growing impatient, issued a sharp reminder to keep moving forward. As Rohan approached the academy's entrance, a memory stirred of someone from his past, wondering if they were here now too. His thoughts drifted to Sharp, a legendary sword saint from the esteemed Grandsire clan, renowned as the Empire's mightiest swordsman. The protagonist mused that since Sharp was roughly his age, they might cross paths here at the academy. Still, unsure of the odds, he decided to let fate guide the encounter. A Selvan broke his reverie, asking if Rohan had brought the item in question. He meant the feather Roman had taken from the bird they rescued that night, a clue to track down its owner. Roman pulled out the feather, deciding they should find the owner before heading to the exam hall. Rohan noticed the feather tilting upward in his hand. This could only mean the bird's owner resided at the top of the towering building. Meanwhile, on the highest floor, a man grumbled about his new role as a professor. Perched on his shoulder was the very bird Roman and his cell had saved, now chirping lively. The bird seemed to sense its rescuer had arrived in the capital. Its owner, Leon Van Fanscher, a zoology professor, was about to open a window for fresh air. He wanted the room to feel welcoming when the bird's savior arrived, but something felt off. As he reached for the door, Rohan's face appeared, startling him. The professor was stunned, but Rohan quickly realized this beastman was the owner of the bird, Blue Eye. The unexpected reunion sparked a roar from the lion-like professor that echoed across the academy. Varun, trembling, demanded to know who Rohan was, shaken by the window entry. Inside, they settled down. Rohan complained the lion's roar nearly deafened him, while his cell panted from the climb. Still wary, Varun asked if they were after his bluebird, named Morbius. But then he spotted the feather in Roman's hand. Recognition dawned, and Varun's expression softened as he realized who his visitors were. These were the heroes who saved Morbius from poachers that fateful night. The lion professor began apologizing profusely for his earlier reaction. He continued until Rohan waved it off, asking him to let it go. Roman jokingly blamed their odd entry on his cell's telekinesis, which they'd used to float up the tower. As his cell started to spill that it was Rohan's idea, Roman quickly hushed him with a playful nudge. Shifting topics, Rohan remarked he hadn't expected a rare Whirlian professor to own the Bluebird. Varun countered, surprised that Morbius's heroes were mere applicants to the Filling Academy. He added that, had he known, he'd have written them a recommendation to ease their admission. Roman, barely listening, had come for a different reason. He had a pressing question for Varun. Rohan presented a peculiar purple object he'd found earlier, puzzling Varun at first glance. Upon closer inspection, Varun realized this wasn't mere refuse, but a rare dreambird egg. Varun's eyes widened with awe as he held the egg, while Rohan assumed it was just an ordinary bird egg. The professor clarified that this was no common egg. It was a fabled dream egg. What made it extraordinary was the mystery of what might emerge from it, unknown to anyone. He explained that a typical egg would hatch a bird, but this one operated differently. The dream egg's outcome hinged on its surroundings, absorbing unique energies to shape its hatching. Legends told of a phoenix rising from one in a lava field, cloaked in flames. In a monster's lair, it might birth an entirely new kind of beast. In some cases, the creature wouldn't resemble a bird at all. Varun noted he could usually predict the hatchling by studying the egg's mana, but this one was exceptional. Its mana swirled with countless vibrant hues, like a rainbow, making it impossible to foresee the outcome. Overwhelmed by the professor's explanation, Rohan remarked that so much significance was tied to a simple egg. His gaze shifted to Morbius, questioning why the bird would entrust such an egg to him. Inwardly, Rohan thought he'd never met a bird so brazen as this one. Varun, meanwhile, had a serious request. He asked Rohan to continue safeguarding the egg, which Rohan didn't mind. The egg's rarity was revealed. A dream bird lays only one in its lifetime, making this Morbius's sole heir. Varun wasn't surprised, noting Morbius must have sensed something unique in Rohan, its saviors. Having been Morbius's lifelong companion, Varun wanted to honor the bird's choice. Rohan accepted the duty, curious about what creature might eventually hatch. As the exam time neared, the pair prepared to leave, but Varun asked them to pause. He'd been pondering a fitting gift to thank them for saving Morbius, and finally had an idea. The professor produced an ancient-looking parchment from his desk. Neither Rohan nor his cell expected such a gift from Varun. After bidding farewell, they left Varun's building. They hurried toward Galian Castle's main hall, where the practical exams were held. Inside, a crowd of applicants filled the waiting area. The examiner announced that applicant 111 had just finished. Many hopefuls awaited their turn, some whispering prayers before entering the testing hall. The next candidate for the practical exam was visibly anxious, fidgeting as he waited. Beyond the doors lay a vast hall, ready to test the hopefuls. Naturally, our protagonist was among them, slated to go after applicant. Growing restless in the long line, Rohan grumbled that the wait was dragging on forever. Beside him stood Maria, the blonde merchant's daughter, also awaiting her turn. He quirked an eyebrow at her elaborate attire. She puffed up proudly, explaining that the prestigious Filling Academy, frequented by nobles, demanded such finery. Maria added that she aimed to charm a wealthy patron for her family's business, so her efforts weren't wasted. With a sigh, she mentioned hoping to spot a certain someone, but the magic testing hall was in another building. Soon, applicant 112 finished, and the examiner called for the next in line. Knowing his moment had come, Rohan rose, and Maria encouraged him to stay calm and give his all. With a teasing smirk, she warned that she'd hold him accountable if he flopped, to which he thanked her for her cheeky yet warm support. Before entering, he glanced back at Maria, promising he'd return soon. Inside the exam hall, vibrant banners adorned the walls, each representing different academy factions. Rohan's eyes darted to the figures already present in the room. 5 esteemed filling professors sat before him, tasked with judging whether applicants were worthy of admission. To Rohan, they seemed unremarkable at first glance. Yet one figure stood out, an elderly man at the center, exuding quiet authority. This was Krauchik Kreider, the Academy's headmaster and a renowned archmage. Another caught Rohan's eye, a woman radiating an intense vitality he hadn't felt since his past life. She was Nabi Rose, the Grand Sword Saint and swordsmanship instructor. After sizing up the panel, Rohan introduced himself, and the professors followed suit. Krauchik outlined the exam. Rohan was to strike a magically crafted dummy and showcase any skills he'd mastered. Rohan readied himself, casually stating he'd perform a simple, swift slash, nothing fancy. His words puzzled the professors, as most applicants flaunted mana-based techniques. Some chuckled, remarking that every year brought one such outlier, especially from remote regions. The dummy appeared ordinary but was designed to resist aura and regenerate quickly, a marvel of magical craftsmanship. Two professors whispered that even the prodigy Sharp had barely scratched the dummy with his blade. Cravat felt a flush of embarrassment at the brazen behavior of the group. They spoke audaciously, heedless of the applicant standing right before them. The elderly man now pinned his hopes on Roland to perform an act that would silence their doubts. From his viewpoint, the microphone was set, positioned before the training dummy, yet an unusual tension hung in the air. Prova marveled at the sheer energy radiating from this young man standing before her. In a fleeting moment, he executed a swift roll and launched his move. His action seemed to freeze time itself, delivering a single, precise strike to the training dummy. The sheer power of the blow reverberated, catching someone off guard. Nabarro sensed the impact, her startled reaction betraying her surprise. The MC, having showcased his abilities, concluded his demonstration with confidence. He then announced to the professors that he had finished and had nothing more to prove. The other professors scoffed, dismissing his effort, claiming a single strike was insufficient to pass. A blonde professor even sought the headmaster's nod of agreement. But Cravat stood frozen, his mind reeling in disbelief. The old man was visibly sweating, his gaze locked on the scene unfolding. Suddenly, Instructor Navarro slammed her foot onto the table, startling the other professors. In an instant, the sword saint vanished from her spot. She reappeared before Ronan, her face etched with a fierce, intimidating glare. Her blade arced toward the MC with lethal intent. With all her strength, she tried to halt her own devastating strike, while Ronan remained unfazed, as if it were trivial. The MC calmly remarked that her actions had startled him. Navarro, now intense, demanded to know Ronan's true identity and where he had honed such swordsmanship. The two stood in the room's center, her question leaving Ronan puzzled, prompting Navarro to rephrase. She inquired if Ronan could track her movements, to which he affirmed, noting their impressive precision. Ronan explained that her stance at the table made drawing her sword challenging, yet she had struck thrice by the time she reached him. Navarro confirmed his observation, acknowledging her 3 strikes, mirroring what Ronan had demonstrated on the dummy. Ronan's earlier display had come across as brazen to the professors. Navarro had anticipated this outcome the moment Ronan positioned himself before the dummy. His movement appeared as a single clean cut, but in reality he had struck the dummy 3 times. Moreover, Ronan had deliberately slowed his final strike to allow the professors to comprehend the feat. By being considerate to the professors, Ronan had unintentionally provoked Navarro. Amid the confrontation, Krawczyk remained silent, observing quietly. Meanwhile, the theoretical professors were utterly baffled, unfit for their roles in the first place. Ronan lowered his gaze, believing it was all a misunderstanding, as he had slowed his final strike to spare the sword from breaking against the dummy. The tense atmosphere and the professor's skeptical glares made it clear that no explanation from Ronan would sway them. Navarro, the sword saint, kept her blade aimed at him, unwavering. Moments later, she lowered her sword with a deliberate motion. Navarro sheathed her weapon as she strode back to the table, her voice carrying a stern promise to remember Ronan's name. Her face held a daunting intensity as she declared she would personally oversee his training. Navarro sat down, still visibly irritated by the events. Professor Craven mentally noted her words, sensing her underlying intent. He recognized Navarro's outward frustration masked her plan to take Ronan under her wing as a disciple. To maintain his authority before the applicant, Craven began praising Ronan's performance, commending the impressive skill displayed in multiple aspects. He then shifted to the next phase of the exam, where Prova prepared to pose a straightforward question with no correct or incorrect response. Ronan needed only to answer truthfully. When Craven asked what Ronan hoped to gain at Filion Academy, Ronan froze, caught off guard by the unexpected question. A flicker in his eyes betrayed a sudden memory surfacing from his past. He recalled a haunting scene of his fallen comrades, stacked lifelessly, a stark reminder of his solitude. This memory crystallized Ronan's purpose. He sought to master a life free of regrets. His response stunned the headmaster, casting an uneasy silence over the room. After a pause, the professors came to a realization and directed Ronan to bow, signaling the end of his entrance exam. Ronan complied, exiting and closing the door behind him. Cravat lingered on Ronan's answer, puzzled by its complexity and the challenge of teaching such an abstract goal. The old man chuckled, already brainstorming ways to impart that profound lesson to Ronan. Meanwhile, the other professors grumbled, still clueless about Ronan's earlier feat. Though it was undeniably genuine, the magically reinforced training dummy began to disintegrate around its neck, revealing a precise cut, clear evidence of Ronan's remarkable talent. The skeptical professor's eyes widened in shock as they registered this discovery. The dummy's head detached completely, tumbling to the ground. Ronan, the student responsible for this feat, stood just outside the door. He remained captivated by the masterful swordsmanship Navarro had displayed. He pondered whether, even at the height of his past self-strength, he could have bested her. In his mind, despite surviving countless battles in his previous life, Navarro's prowess made him feel insignificant, underscoring how much he still had to learn. The MC laughed softly, certain that choosing Filian Academy was the right decision, thanks to the second chance his captain had given him. Ronan began walking away, a confident smile spreading across his face, knowing the academy would offer boundless opportunities for growth. He headed toward the written exam venue, brimming with assurance after memorizing everything over the past month. Ronan had assumed that gaining entry to Filian Academy would be a breeze, a simple task he could handle effortlessly. Yet, after the written exam, he found himself in a dire state, looking as though he'd fought a losing battle. Maria and Akel stood before him as despair consumed him. He muttered that he had completely botched the exam. Despite Maria providing all the necessary study materials, Ronan had only managed to answer half the questions correctly. The reason? He had fixated on a single book, neglecting the others stuffed in his bag, losing himself in one text while ignoring the rest. Acel berated himself for not checking on Ronan during their month-long review, while Maria's irritated expression branded Ronan as utterly foolish. She pieced together why Ronan had been so despondent since the exam, but reassured him that the results were still pending, so all hope wasn't lost. Maria encouraged him, saying that moping wouldn't change his situation, and revealed that practical skills carried far more weight than the written portion. Suddenly, a vibrant blue glow illuminated the nearby hall, accompanied by a shimmering magic circle forming on the floor. One of the applicants shouted that the results were out, snapping the trio's attention toward the commotion. A massive magical board materialized before the applicants, displaying the names of those who had passed the entrance exam. Maria, caught off guard, hadn't expected the results to be revealed so soon. As for their rankings, Acel secured 12th in the practical exam and topped the written test, while Maria placed 9th in both categories. The three exchanged glances, grasping the significance of their achievements. Maria's cheeks flushed with pride. She had officially passed the exam. She and Acel erupted in celebration, now proud students of Selene Academy. Maria pointed out that Akel had absolutely dominated the written exam. Upon closer inspection, Acel noticed he was tied with two other students for the top spot. Maria teased him relentlessly, emphasizing that this was no small feat. The spirited blonde then turned to Ronan, asking if he had spotted his name on the board. Ronan stood motionless, his expression unreadable, as if detached from the moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow, as though his spirit had fled. He admitted he wasn't surprised his name was absent, given his written exam blunder. Maria, incredulous, had fully expected this remarkable young man to pass with ease. She urged Ronan to look again, but his hope had already crumbled, insisting he'd scoured every inch of the board. As Maria scolded Ronan for giving up, a sudden fiery projectile plummeted from the sky toward them. The fireball struck the ground, diverting all the applicants' attention to the impact. Ronan, puzzled by the commotion, turned to Maria, who explained that the spectacle was the grand finale of fireworks celebrating the admission test's conclusion. Their eyes widened in awe as a majestic creature, the Glory Phoenix, appeared before them, its radiant form commanding attention. The beast folded its shimmering wings, preparing for its next move. A moment later, it unleashed a barrage of blazing fireballs into the sky. One fireball veered toward Ronan, who was too distracted to notice the danger hurtling his way. A massive explosion erupted nearby, shaking the area. The fireball hadn't struck Ronan, but instead served as a dramatic announcement. Ronan had clinched second place overall in the martial arts department, topping the practical exam, but ranking 5,112th in the written portion. Maria and Acel stood dumbfounded, still processing the stunning revelation before them. Overjoyed, Maria and Acel enveloped Ronan in a tight hug, celebrating his remarkable second-place achievement. The duo showered Ronan with praise, noting that despite his dismal written exam score, His practical skills had carried him through. Maria remarked that this outcome was no surprise, as she had always recognized Ronan's genius. Yet, as Ronan basked in his ranking, a realization hit him. Claiming first in the practical exam meant he had outshone someone expected to take the top spot. Ronan knew that individuals' prideful nature would not let this slide, and sure enough, that very person was already approaching them. A figure advanced slowly, commenting that Ronan had indeed secured first in the practical exam, an ominous aura radiating from him that sent chills through the air. This newcomer exuded an air of dignity and formidable presence. The one confronting Ronan was none other than Sharpen, the sword saint from Ronan's past life, destined to become the Empire's greatest swordsman. The long-awaited encounter between these two swordsmen, whose rivalry would shape the world's future, had finally begun. Other Filion Academy students nearby gaped in awe at Sharpen, the Empire's rising star, gracing the campus with his presence. Maria whispered to Ronan that this enigmatic figure clearly wanted a word with him, while Aesel noted the intimidating atmosphere surrounding the man. Ronan felt a growing unease, sensing this encounter would bring trouble. He recalled Sharpen's intolerance for anyone surpassing him in swordsmanship, and the fiery, unyielding spirit in Sharpen's gaze confirmed it. Determined to avoid conflict, Ronan feigned ignorance about his top ranking in the practical exam. But his act didn't fool Sharpen, whose piercing stare remained locked on Ronan, unyielding. Sharpen challenged Ronan's deception, demanding why he was hiding the truth. Ronan sighed, realizing his ruse had failed, and tried to deflect, urging Sharpen to stop seeking conflict and claiming there was no proof for his accusations. When Ronan insisted on evidence, Sharpen gripped his sword tightly, his gesture a clear declaration of intent to prove his point. In a flash, Sharpen drew his sword and lunged at Ronan, who swiftly parried the strike with his own blade. Ronan hadn't anticipated the situation escalating so rapidly. Maria and Aesel stood frozen, powerless to intervene, watching the clash from a distance. Sharpen taunted Ronan, asking if this was proof enough, asserting that only someone ranked first could have blocked such an attack. The surrounding students erupted in panic, witnessing what had escalated into a full-fledged duel. Sharpen demanded Ronan showcase the skills that had bested him, while Ronan inwardly noted the sword saint's eccentric nature. Left with no choice, Ronan accepted the challenge, launching a counterattack with a scowl. His frustration mirrored in Sharpen's gleaming blade as their swords met. Ronan unleashed a flurry of slashes, identical to those he used against the training dummy, now aimed at Sharpen. The rapid, fluid strikes nearly caught Sharpen off guard. Sharpen countered with a single, precise slash to deflect Ronan's barrage. Ronan declared that this was the same technique he'd performed in the practical exam. Though Sharpen blocked the attack, he stood speechless, his arm trembling from the force. He conceded internally that such a strike deserved a high score. Yet Sharpen, undeterred, kept talking and advanced, refusing to back down. He claimed Ronan's slashes weren't enough to defeat him, and their blades clashed once more. Ronan pleaded for Sharpen to ease up, but Sharpen insisted he reveal his true skill. Sharpen's irritation stemmed from his inability to accept anyone surpassing him in swordsmanship. The two traded ferocious blows, each strike capable of ending the duel in an instant. Ronan cursed inwardly, realizing this was exactly why he'd wanted to avoid Sharpen, whose obsession with being the Empire's greatest swordsman was relentless. He knew Sharpen might soon unleash his aura manipulation, a skill far beyond Ronan's current abilities. Recalling Sharpen's deadly Tempest sword technique from his past life, one of the most formidable moves he'd ever witnessed, Ronan felt outmatched. Unable to face it with his current strength, Ronan spun around and bolted. This retreat infuriated Sharpen, who couldn't fathom the top-ranked practical exam candidate fleeing mid-fight. In a surprising move, Ronan grabbed Aesel, pulling him close. Sharpen pursued, undeterred, as Ronan schemed to use Aesel as a shield. Aesel panicked, unprepared for his friend to put him in such a perilous position. Sharpen roared that hiding behind another was a cowardly act, unworthy of a true knight. Aesel shouted that he was a man, not a lady, while Ronan, wearing a sly grin, told Sharpen he was right about one thing. Sharpen would always uphold his knightly ideals. Seizing the moment, Ronan launched a surprise attack, landing a solid punch on Sharpen while using Aesel as cover. The blow connected cleanly, catching Sharpen off guard and staggering him from the impact. He stumbled, disoriented and unsteady, collapsing to one knee. Ronan spun toward his companions, declaring the moment had arrived. The host bellowed for them to flee immediately. One stood paralyzed, stunned by the command. They appeared, attempting to block the escape, but it was futile. Ronan and his allies bolted. Moments later, a guard rushed in, alerted to a brawl erupting at the scene. He stopped dead, shocked by the sight of those entangled in the skirmish. The guard noticed Charlotte Bond, esteemed and revered, crumpled on the ground. He hurried to assist, asking if he was hurt. He urged Charlotte Bond to identify his attackers for a swift pursuit, but Charlotte resisted the notion. Rejecting noble treatment, he insisted he was merely an academy applicant. Rising, he reassured the crowd there was no cause for concern, explaining it was an honorable duel between swordsmen. She asserted she could handle herself, brushing dirt from her clothes. Yet, as she did, something seized her focus. He spotted a fracture in his blade, unbelievable for a weapon forged from premium mithril. He reflected on Ronan's strike, initially deeming it ordinary but now recognizing its potency. A grin spread across his face, intrigued by this revelation. He vowed to etch Ronan's name into his memory henceforth. The following dawn, near the capital's edge in Shima Forest, soft footfalls echoed through the woods. They belonged to Rohan and his group, with their leader clutching a map, searching intently. Pausing to catch his breath, a companion questioned Rohan if this quest was wise so soon. He was haunted by yesterday's clash, where Roland struck a member of the Granja clan. Roland's punch was so fierce it nearly shattered his opponent's nose. The red-haired companion fretted over potential retaliation from Charlotte Bond, but Roland dismissed it, confident in her good nature. From what he recalled, she was passionate about swordplay but grounded in honor and integrity, a true noble who shielded the vulnerable. Rohan had anticipated Charlotte Bond would tell the guards it was a fair duel. His companion began to relax, seeing the truth in Rohan's words. At that moment, Roland announced they'd reached the spot Professor Viren described. A radiant azure pool sparkled before them. Rohan, beaming, exclaimed they'd found Fernando's spring. Mana, drifting mysteriously across the world, converges into a single pool known as a mana vein. This phenomenon causes surrounding materials to absorb the mana's essence. For example, a common stone near a mana vein could transform into a top-tier mineral, or a simple weed might become a potent healing herb. The Fernando Spring is an extraordinary location where mana streams merge with the water. Roland asserted that this water's worth was immeasurable, tempting anyone who found it to claim it entirely for themselves. Reflecting on the past, Ronan felt that Professor Viren had been remarkably kind, providing them with a map to this obscure place simply to aid in hatching a single dream egg. When Sheldon dipped his hand into the water, he marveled, declaring it was his first encounter with such a dense concentration of mana in one spot. He mused that training near this spring could amplify his spellcasting abilities far beyond their usual strength. Elvin observed that the egg nestled in Roland's pocket was once again radiating light. This wasn't the first time. The egg was rapidly soaking up the magical energy surrounding the spring at an astonishing pace. Rohan admitted to his companion that he couldn't perceive mana himself. He then thought of Maria, who couldn't join them due to her commitments with the Merchant Guild. His companion nodded in agreement but sensed something was off. He pressed Rohan, asking if he felt anything unusual in the area. The companion recalled Professor Viren's words. This place brimmed with pure mana, and they had anticipated it would teem with fantastical creatures. Yet they hadn't spotted a single living being. This realization struck Rohan with sudden alarm. What unnerved them most was the eerie absence of any animal sounds in the vicinity. The MC took a steadying breath. He realized he had grown too careless. Rohan warned his companion that the situation was spiraling out of control, questioning why trouble seemed to follow him everywhere. He urged his companion to stay vigilant, having caught the faint scent of blood nearby. Not far off, animal carcasses were stacking up. The culprits behind these gruesome acts were shadowy, mysterious figures. The companion was puzzled by Rohan's warning, but the evidence they found lent credence to his claims. Rohan's face hardened with a steely glare, realizing someone had reached this place before them. The two continued discussing the unexpected intruders in this sacred spring. Unbeknownst to them, a purple arrow was already aimed in their direction. 5 masked figures had taken their positions, ready to loose their arrows at the slightest movement from Rohan and his companion. After sensing their presence, the arrows soared toward the MC and his companion. Rohan stood calmly, biding his time for the perfect moment. At the last possible second, he gripped his sword, ready to unsheath it. With a powerful swing, he created a massive water surge that shielded him from the arrows. He deftly sliced each arrow in two. The MC studied the arrow's design, sensing something familiar about them. After a moment of reflection, he recalled where he had seen such arrows before. In his past life, during his time with the disciplinary squad. He remembered sharing a campfire with others who carried these distinctive arrows, members of that same squad. One of the men from that past campsite had shown Rohan an arrow identical to the ones he faced today. The red-haired man boasted that these arrows were unique, capable of blasting through an orc's skull with a single shot. That same red-haired man had once challenged Rohan, their squad captain, to test the arrow's power. It turned out the red-haired man was once part of a poaching crew before enlisting in the disciplinary squad. He bragged that these arrows had been used countless times by an elite member of their poaching group. This elite member was known by the fearsome moniker Kala, the Bloodhound. Back in the present, Rohan was irritated to realize he was facing this poaching group again, and these foes seemed far more formidable than the last. Rohan sighed, resigned to the fact that he had little choice but to confront them. He ordered his companion to find cover and stay alert to avoid becoming a target for the enemy's arrow barrage. Left alone, his companion watched as Rohan promised to handle things briefly. With that, Rohan charged forward, determined to crush this poaching group once more. The archers were stunned, wondering how one man could deflect their mana-infused arrows with a single strike. Their chatter was cut short as Rohan nimbly leaped between tree branches, closing in on them. Rohan moved like a predator, steadily stalking his prey. The purple-haired leader sensed Rohan's approach and urgently ordered his men to scatter, planning to encircle the MC for an attack. Rohan overheard the command and noted the leader's quick thinking, suspecting this opponent might be tougher than those he'd faced before. From his vantage point, he saw the masked men execute their plan, realizing the situation was turning against him. Rohan shouted for his enemies to halt, boldly claiming he was one of their own. This caught the leader's attention, who demanded to know what Rohan meant by such a claim. With a sly grin, Rohan teased that they must not have heard the latest news. He introduced himself as Ahir, a young bloodhound from the Damas branch, invoking the name of the giant beings he'd vanquished in his past life. His words worked. The masked men cautiously approached, trying to verify his claims. The leader scoffed, insisting there was no way a youth like Rohan could be a bloodhound, suggesting a lower rank affiliation would be more believable. Rohan laughed, telling the leader he could confirm his rank by consulting the wolf of their branch, but quickly issued a warning. He cautioned that questioning the identity of a higher-ranking member was a dangerous mistake. His words left the leader speechless, though seething with barely contained rage. The purple-haired leader snapped at Rohan, warning him not to belittle him in front of his underlings. He grabbed Rohan's collar, threatening consequences if the taunting continued. Rohan, unfazed, cheekily remarked that picking fights was a flaw they both shared. As tensions surged, one of the leader's subordinates intervened, cautioning that they couldn't dismiss the chance that Rohan's claims were true. Within the Kalaboros organization, ranks were clear. Grunts, known as feral dogs, handled menial tasks, bloodhounds outranked them, and branch leaders were called wolves. Rohan knew this structure well from battling Kalaboros in his past life. He also understood that feral dogs wouldn't dare harm someone of higher rank. The subordinate suggested verifying Rohan's claims with their captain first, warning that attacking a true bloodhound could spark conflict with other branches. Amid their debate, a new figure emerged from the bushes, grumbling about the commotion. His voice drew everyone's attention, heads turning toward the sound. This bald man, Viame, was the wolf of the Demir branch, the true leader of the group. The purple-haired man grinned, relieved at Vime's timely arrival. All of Rohan's earlier claims were relayed to Vime, while the 4 feral dogs kept a wary eye on the MC. The grunts, distracted by the possibility of trouble for attacking a superior, let their guard slip. Rohan hadn't anticipated facing a wolf rank here. Smirking, Rohan realized the entire group was now gathered before him. Vime spoke up, questioning if Rohan was truly Ahir from the Damas branch. Rohan nodded, but Vime frowned, noting that the organization had assigned this mountain to the Demir branch. With a sly grin, Rohan admitted he wasn't aware of that detail for one simple reason. He wasn't actually a bloodhound and had no shame in confessing it. This revelation enraged Vime. Before the group could react, Rohan unleashed a devastating slash that struck the feral dogs. The grunts had no time to evade, and Rohan taunted them, admitting he'd fabricated the name Ahir. Only the purple-haired man and Vime remained. Before they could raise their weapons, Rohan appeared before them, grinning at how his deception had outwitted them. Vime fell for Rohan's ruse, caught off guard. In a flash, Rohan defeated one of Calaboros' strongest warriors, leaving the purple-haired man frozen, staring at his leader's downfall. It took the purple-haired man several seconds to process the collapse of his group. Trembling, he heard Rohan's voice echo his earlier warning. The fate of the arrogant would always be the grimmest. With a swift strike, Rohan severed the purple-haired man's fingers, leaving them to fall to the ground. The man howled in agony, his eyes wide with disbelief and pain. Collapsing to his knees, he clutched his bleeding hand, mourning his loss, while Rohan stood calmly, unfazed. Rohan told the man to pull himself together, producing a piece of paper and instructing him to examine it. He ordered the feral dog to sketch a map detailing the locations of all Calaboros branches. Grinning, Rohan asked if the purple-haired grunt was unwilling to comply with the task. He made it clear that if the feral dog proved useless, there'd be no reason to spare his life. The grunt, desperate, agreed to cooperate but protested that he lacked the means to draw. Rohan quipped that he'd just provided a pen. By pen, he meant the blood from the man's wounded hand, now dripping red. Time passed as the grunt worked. The feral dog painstakingly mapped out every Calaboros base across the mountain. Rohan praised his skill, noting his unexpected talent. Finished, the grunt asked if he was now free to go, as Rohan had implied. Rohan pocketed the map and nodded, seemingly confirming his release. Suddenly, a crimson slash tore through the air. The grunt's body split in two, like wood cleaved by an axe. With a cold, unyielding expression, Rohan silenced the grunt's plea for freedom. Later, Rohan reunited with his companion, the sound of retching echoing nearby. The noise came from his companion, overwhelmed by the gruesome scene in the forest. Rohan told him to stop overreacting. He reminded his friend that he'd warned him about the horrors they might encounter before arriving. The companion admitted he'd tried to prepare, but the sight was too horrific to bear. The nausea stemmed from a towering pile of animal carcasses strewn across the forest floor. Staring at the dead creatures, the companion asked if this was the work of the Calaboros organization. Rohan confirmed it, adding that letting such culprits live was a crime in itself. When the companion began to object, Rohan cut him off, stating that even the government would demand their deaths. Rohan fell into a moment of quiet reflection. He thought of Professor Viren, certain that seeing this slaughter would devastate him. Among the slain were creatures resembling Morbius, a heartbreaking sight. Rohan was about to tell his companion they should return to the capital when the dream egg in his pocket stirred. Puzzled, Rohan wondered what was causing the egg's movement. He reached to inspect the dream egg, while his companion called out, staring at something in alarm. Pointing with a trembling finger, the companion drew Rohan's attention to a disturbing sight. He stammered, asking Rohan what was happening before them. Rohan's eyes widened in shock as he saw what his companion meant. The blood from the slaughtered animals began to rise, floating unnaturally in the air. The floating blood coalesced, forming what resembled a massive mana vein in the air. This phenomenon persisted for a few tense seconds. Abruptly, the blood's flow turned wild and forceful, as if drawn toward an unseen target. The companion panicked, but Rohan stepped forward, bracing for a potential mystical assault. Gripping his sword tightly, Rohan accidentally let the dream egg slip from his hand. Instead of falling, the egg emitted a brilliant purple glow, deepening Rohan's confusion. The blood, now a swirling mana vein, enveloped the dream egg. Rohan realized the egg was absorbing this potent mana. The absorption accelerated, and the egg's radiant light nearly blinded both Rohan and his companion. The companion shouted, asking what was happening, but Rohan admitted he was just as clueless. Yet, he grinned, certain of one thing. He declared that whatever creature lay within the dream egg was far from ordinary. Minutes later, the last drop of blood vanished, fully absorbed by the egg. The dream egg completed its mysterious process. The two stood watching, wondering if that was the end. Rohan was about to note that the egg appeared unchanged when something shifted. Cracks began to spiderweb across the egg's surface. It wiggled, the fractures spreading wider with each movement. Both held their breath, sensing the egg was on the verge of hatching. From the creature's perspective within the egg, the first sight was Rohan's excited, smiling face. The creature burst forth, darting straight toward Rohan. Unexpectedly, it collided with his face in an awkward, enthusiastic greeting. Rohan's nose throbbed, nearly broken, yet he was eager to identify the hatched creature. His eyes caught the shimmer of dark, galaxy-like wings. The creature's full form emerged, a mythical being, unlike any Morbius they'd expected. Upon closer inspection, the companion remarked that it resembled a dragon more than anything else. Rohan asked if he was certain, and the companion insisted it matched the dragons from ancient texts. Rohan, puzzled, recalled Morbius's traits, wondering what kind of mana the egg had absorbed to produce this form. Despite the mystery, both were charmed by the creature's adorable appearance. The mood shifted as Rohan recalled the dragon's rough greeting, rubbing his sore nose. The creature closed its eyes and a glowing magic circle materialized before it. A strange energy surged toward Rohan. Suddenly, the pain in his nose vanished, healed by the baby dragon's magic, leaving the companion in awe. The companion noted the dragon's apparent fondness for Rohan, who was thrilled, suspecting it held even more hidden powers. Sheldon suggested they name the creature, as Dreambird no longer suited the majestic dragon. As Rohan gazed at the baby dragon, he pondered what name would suit the tiny creature perfectly. Before he could decide, the dragon's expression shifted, sensing something nearby. With astonishing speed, the dragon darted off in the opposite direction. The companion wondered where it was headed, but Rohan just grinned, impressed that the dragon could detect the hidden observer watching them. The sound of frantic footsteps echoed through the forest. A desperate figure, Barrows, an errand boy from the Demir branch, sprinted for his life. Barrows clenched his jaw, bewildered by the creature he'd just witnessed. Sent on a simple errand, he returned to find his comrades slaughtered. He had seen the blood absorption and the dream eggs hatching. Now, the mysterious creature he'd glimpsed was pursuing him. Glancing back, he confirmed it was still there. Panic surged as he realized the creature was rapidly closing the distance. Tripping over a tree root, Barrows stumbled and fell. Sprawled on the ground, he braced for his end. Turning to face the creature, he froze in horror. To his shock, it began absorbing blood from a cut he'd sustained in the fall. Barrows screamed for help, helpless and frantic. Fortunately, the sound of approaching footsteps reached him. A commanding voice ordered the baby dragon to stop. The dragon turned, and Barrows saw Rohan and his companion. Rohan warned the dragon, now named Cetus, to halt before it killed the man. The companion realized Rohan had just christened the dragon Cetus. Rohan asked Cetus if it liked its new name, while Barrows lay trembling nearby. Barrows wondered if the young man before him was truly the creature's master. His thoughts were interrupted as Rohan addressed him, asking if he was all right. Barrows knelt in gratitude, thanking Rohan for saving his life. He paused, suddenly uneasy, realizing Rohan somehow knew his name, despite never meeting. When Barrows questioned this, Rohan pressed a sword to his neck, stating he didn't need to know how. Barrows fell silent, sensing the gravity in Rohan's tone. In his mind, Rohan hadn't expected to encounter Barrows, his old comrade from the poaching group, who once showed him those distinctive arrows in his past life. Rohan knew Barrows would eventually rise to become a talkative bloodhound. Confused by Rohan's remark, Barrows protested he was merely an errand boy. Rohan's smile widened, seeing opportunity. He told Barrows he had a task for him. With a chilling grin, Rohan clarified that this task was not optional. That night, Rohan and his companion returned to the capital. Rohan clutched a handful of gold coins, a gleam of satisfaction in his eyes. Rohan remarked that their brief journey exceeded his expectations. His companion nodded, noting how unexpected events had caught them off guard. Back at the spring, Rohan had cleverly bottled some of the pure mana vein for safekeeping. The duo then visited Mario's father to have the mana vein appraised, ultimately selling it for a substantial sum. In the present, the companion mused that finances would no longer be an issue. Rohan agreed, expressing gratitude to Professor Virine for the opportunity. When they tried to visit the professor, they learned he was away on a business trip, missing the chance to show him Cetus. Still, everything aligned with Rohan's strategy, particularly securing the map to the Kala Boros branches. Additionally, he'd gained a new ally in Barrows, who would be occupied with the task Rohan assigned him. Rohan ensured Barrows' commitment by instilling fear, guaranteeing he'd carry out the covert mission diligently. The companion inquired about Rohan's plans for the newfound wealth, noting that as the second ranked in the entrance exam, he'd be exempt from tuition and receive academy support. For the first time, Rohan pondered how to use the funds. He recalled that the academy's entrance ceremony was fast approaching. Days later, at a bustling carriage station in central Vallon, a butler greeted a refined-looking woman, informing her they'd arrived at their destination. She had striking silver hair and captivating eyes, experiencing the capital for the first time. This woman was Errol, Rohan's older sister. Stepping out of the carriage, she marveled at the vibrant sights around her. Rohan welcomed her, asking if the journey had worn her out. He inquired about any notable events back home, But Errol turned the question on him, curious about his adventures. She admitted her shock at seeing a luxurious carriage at their family home, wondering how her younger brother had amassed such wealth. True to her role as a sister, Errol fussed over Rohan, noting his thinner frame and questioning if he was eating enough. Rohan reassured her he was fine, easing her worries. Her attention then shifted to Cetus, perched nearby. Rohan introduced his new companion, explaining that Cetus had joined him due to unique circumstances. After their brief reunion, Rohan urged his sister to hurry, as they had pressing matters to attend to. Errol, confused after just arriving, questioned the rush. Rohan explained that these tasks were crucial, especially since academy life would soon consume his time. They entered one of the capital's upscale shops. Errol's face lit up with awe, asking Rohan if this was all real. While Rohan lounged on a couch, he encouraged his sister to choose any clothes she liked. Though aware of Rohan's newfound wealth, Errol still found the extravagance overwhelming. Emerging from the fitting room, Errol held a stunning, elegant dress, wondering about its price. Meanwhile, Rohan was arranging purchases, having bought a heap of items for his sister and asking if they could be delivered. Errol's eyes widened at the mountain of clothes, overwhelmed by the unexpected generosity. For Rohan, this was merely his way of repaying his sister's countless acts of kindness toward him. Errol felt a surge of pride hearing such grown-up sentiments from her younger brother. Tears welled in her eyes as she marveled at how much Rohan had matured. Overcome with emotion, Errol rushed to the door, loudly proclaiming her pride in her brother, while Rohan tried to hush her embarrassing outburst. The shop staff found the sibling exchange heartwarming and endearing. They remarked on the strong bond between the two siblings. Errol asked where they were headed next, and Rohan mentioned visiting a nearby blacksmith to browse for a new sword. As he began to share a tale about meeting a wild swordsman, Rohan opened the door to find that very swordsman standing there, greeting him casually and asking if he'd finished shopping. Rohan froze, momentarily speechless at the sight. The unexpected encounter rattled him. He hadn't anticipated this swordsman appearing right before him. He questioned what Shivan was doing there, to which Shivan replied he'd just ordered a sword nearby and spotted Rohan by chance. Shivan insisted it was a coincidence, urging Rohan to drop his suspicious attitude. Skeptical, Rohan knew Shivan had the makings of an obsessive tracker. His irritation grew as he recalled Shivan's antics and the damage done to his previous sword. The air grew tense, the two on the verge of a heated sparring match. Before swords could be drawn, Errol stepped in, reprimanding Rohan for his harsh words. Rohan protested that Shivan had provoked him, but Errol cut him off. That's when Shivan realized the woman before him was Rohan's older sister. After scolding Rohan, Errol apologized to Shivan, explaining that her brother's sharp tongue hit a good heart. As Errol's face came into view, Shivan, heir to a noble family and a rising star in the empire, felt an enchanting spark. To him, it was as if a divine figure had descended from the heavens. The future sword saint flushed deeply, unable to contain his awe. After a few seconds, Shivan regained his composure, bowing repeatedly and begging for forgiveness. He admitted the misunderstanding stemmed from his own lack of tact, assuring Errol she was blameless and taking full responsibility. Errol's expression softened, charmed by Shivan's kind nature. Delighted to meet one of Rohan's friends, she impulsively grabbed Shivan's hand, thanking him warmly, leaving him flustered by his stroke of luck. While the two kept exchanging compliments and polite gestures, Ronan stood nearby, silently observing the scene unfold. His gaze then landed on something peculiar, making him question if his eyes were deceiving him. To everyone's surprise, Shope became visibly nervous and blurted out a promise to replace MSI's sword, yet he had no gold on hand to fulfill it. The nobleman responded by producing a shining golden insignia, revealing it to be his family's official crest. He handed it to Ariel and explained that she could present it anywhere in the Empire as proof of noble backing. Rohan could hardly believe what was happening. Furthermore, Shope recommended a smithy located at the far west end of the street if they were looking to purchase a new blade. He mentioned the forge had been operating for 5 centuries and was regarded as the best in all the Empire. With that, Shope awkwardly took his leave, still visibly embarrassed but wishing them well. Rohan was left with a puzzled expression, wondering if Shope truly understood the weight of his actions. He thought to himself, giving away that emblem might be equivalent to handing someone the deed to several villages. RNC watched Shope stroll away with his clumsy gait, thinking back and questioning if this was the same Shope he had known in his previous life. The following day arrived, marking the beginning of Filian Academy's grand entrance ceremony. The plaza was filled with newly accepted students. Greeting them was none other than the esteemed headmaster, who declared that this year's newcomers would be known as Class E. Beaming warmly, he introduced himself once more, happy to welcome the fresh faces before him. Among the standout recruits were three individuals recognized for their exceptional abilities, and Krawczyk extended his congratulations. He added that, with their immense talents, there were no limits to what they could achieve. Furthermore, they would benefit from Celine's world-renowned educational methods. The headmaster expressed his belief that many among them would one day be written into the Empire's history books. With pride, he welcomed everyone again, officially announcing the birth of class. All the while, Ronan stood there, yawning discreetly. He thought the speech was a bit too much for a simple orientation. But as he glanced around, he noticed his sister watching with pride in her eyes, and suddenly, it all felt worthwhile. Just then, Kravis gave a small grin and snapped his fingers. A vivid and radiant energy swirled around the students, surrounding them in a kaleidoscope of color. Rohan and the rest of the crowd stared in disbelief as they tried to comprehend what was happening. A massive rupture appeared in the air, distorting the entire space around them. One student screamed in alarm, claiming the sky itself was fracturing. In the blink of an eye, the light engulfed them. And just like that, the students were relocated. They now found themselves in the center of a grand coliseum, surrounded by cheering spectators in the stands. Ronan and his cell marveled at the spectacle. Kravis had just warped an entire group of people with nothing more than a finger snap. With an enigmatic grin, the headmaster declared the commencement of the gathering uniting seniors and juniors, the assembly of upperclassmen and underclassmen. This occasion brings together new freshmen and second-year seniors, marking their initial encounter at this designated venue. The event was reputed to be a challenging interaction between the two cohorts. This unique bridging event stipulated that the top two freshmen would compete against one of the four highest-ranking sophomores. Each of these sophomore elites showcased a distinct combat technique for the freshmen to select from. At this moment, open registration was set to initiate one-on-one duels featuring these prominent students. Crawford re-entered the scene, elaborating on the significance of this occasion. He emphasized that such sparring sessions foster mutual learning, highlighting individual strengths and vulnerabilities, while strengthening bonds between juniors and seniors. It was further disclosed that these matches offered students their first opportunity to embark on a path to greatness. Per tradition, freshmen could pick their adversaries or opt out of the dueling entirely. Crawford then instructed Roman and Charlotte to select their opponents. Roland grew irritated, viewing the headmaster's lengthy speech as a prelude to what he considered mere hazing of newcomers. Among the potential challengers was Nestor, the top-ranked sophomore specializing in martial arts. Next to him stood Brown, a robust figure also holding the top rank. The other two were Karen, ranked 4th, and Irina, the orange-haired third-strongest sophomore. Brown's loud boasts about wanting to take on both freshmen caused Karen to fidget nervously. The MC, aware his sister was observing, resolved to demonstrate his newfound ability to defend himself. Taking a steadying breath, he decided to seize this chance to prove he could forge friendships with peers. Lost in reflection, Rohan experienced a sudden epiphany sparked by the headmaster's earlier words. He raised his hand to gain attention, announcing he had a proposal. Echoing the headmaster's statement, he reiterated that freshmen were free to choose their opponents. Crowther felt a wave of apprehension as he anticipated Rowan's suggestion. The seniors were taken aback by this bold move from a freshman, some even visibly irked. The MC boldly declared his desire to challenge all four sophomores simultaneously. Roman's audacious request shifted the energy in the arena. The unprecedented nature of this challenge forced the professors to confer among themselves. Crawford sought the opinion of Professor Navarro regarding this unusual situation. The charismatic Professor Navarro endorsed Roman's request, asserting it aligned with the Academy's ethos that skill grants freedom to pursue one's desires. Moreover, the victor of this duel would carry profound significance for the observing students. Professor Navarro reassured everyone that she would step in promptly if anything went awry. The headmaster pondered Navarro's advice carefully. After a brief moment of reflection, he decided to approve the proposal, allowing the duel to move forward. Following the brief discussion, Roman and the sophomore contenders stood ready in the center of the arena. The four sophomores felt insulted by this bold, seemingly cocky freshman. Their irritation evident in their glares, Karen and Irina expressed their frustration aloud, determined to humble Roman, asserting that his second-place ranking in the entrance exam didn't justify his audacity. However, the top-ranked sophomore intervened, silencing their complaints and urging the group to focus. He cautioned against underestimating Roman, acknowledging his skill after the freshman outscored a noble in the practical exam. The leader instructed his peers to give their all from the outset. Recognizing the duel's importance to their future, the three followed the top sophomore's directive. Meanwhile, Nero grew anxious, sensing the escalating tension in the chaotic atmosphere. Roman's supportive sister began cheering loudly, advising him to withdraw immediately if he faced serious danger. With a confident smile, Rohan acknowledged his sister's words, signaling he understood her concern. His calm response visibly eased Nero's nerves. Moments later, Headmaster Craiova took charge to officiate the match. He declared that the contest between the seniors and Roman would now begin. As the battle kicked off, Castiel charged at Roman with astonishing speed. Yet, Roman deftly evaded the top sophomore's strike with composure. He marveled at the sharpness and strength of his opponents. Roman mentally compared their prowess to Maria's, noting they were several tiers above her current level. While dodging, he wondered if these sophomores were truly in a league of their own. Irina launched her attack, but Roman swiftly blocked her attempt. Her face was etched with intense focus and determination. As the fight intensified, Irina pressed on with a series of precise combos. Suddenly, Karen appeared behind Roman, shouting for Irina to duck. The two moved in sync, their actions perfectly coordinated as if sharing a single mind. Roman, however, stood his ground, closely observing their tactics. He admired the seniors' seamless teamwork as he deflected the spear of Karan. The sheer force of the attack pushed Roman back several feet. Before he could fully regain his footing, he sensed a presence nearby. Brown loomed close, his massive sword poised, muscles tense with readiness. With a scowl of frustration, Brown demanded to know why Roman was behaving so recklessly. Expressing his disillusionment, Brown remarked that he expected a more serious challenge from the freshman, delivering his attack as he spoke. Roman remained composed, recognizing the incoming attack as a powerful, decisive strike. Simultaneously, the other three sophomores were already positioning themselves for a coordinated follow-up assault, their skills showcasing their elite caliber. In that fleeting moment, time seemed to freeze as Roman swiftly assessed the positions of his opponents. In an instant, Roman vanished from his spot, leaving the sophomores stunned. Unable to halt his momentum, Brown's attack struck the ground with a heavy thud. The three sophomores were caught off guard by this unexpected turn of events. Irina was the first to spot Roman's new position, marveling at his astonishing speed. In the blink of an eye, the trio realized they'd been struck by Roman's blade, and in his mind, he silently praised Seleni's remarkable influence. The swords of the three sophomores shattered under the impact. Yet the battle was far from concluded. Roman stayed vigilant, refusing to let overconfidence cloud his judgment. Brown, with a fierce scowl, proved to be a formidable adversary, as Roman noted his resilience. Roman remarked to Brown that despite his evasive maneuvers and counterattacks, Brown's spirit remained unbroken, charging at him with renewed vigor. Reflecting on their determination, Roman decided to honor their resolve with respect. Instead of dodging or parrying Brown's assault, Roman stepped forward, ready to confront him directly. Brown paused briefly, recognizing a familiar stance in Roman's posture. Roman was poised to unleash a move that would leave the crowd in awe. Mimicking a stance he'd seen Professor Navarro use to intimidate him before, Roman prepared his next action. With eyes closed and a faint smile, Roman unleashed his technique. He executed a high-level maneuver, delivering 3 rapid, precise slashes in quick succession. The attack left visible cracks on Brown's massive sword. Brown could only smirk, incredulous at the turn of events. Roman graciously thanked his seniors, expressing how much he'd learned from them. While acknowledging their strength, Roman's innate genius and uncanny luck proved overwhelming. A hush fell over the Colosseum as the crowd processed the spectacle. The audience was still grappling with the rapid sequence of events. Moments later, the arena erupted in cheers, with students buzzing about the mysterious new freshman. All 4 sophomores' weapons lay destroyed, signaling their complete defeat. Masto remarked that he felt no shame in losing such a one-sided match. He pondered aloud where such extraordinary talent had suddenly emerged from. To him, Roman's strength seemed almost otherworldly. Meanwhile, Roman stood quietly, his attention fixed elsewhere. He glanced at his sister, Errol, who was excitedly chattering to the person next to her, beaming with pride over his performance. Roman then turned to his defeated seniors. He expressed gratitude for their efforts, commending their skill and sportsmanship. He offered his respects and expressed gratitude to them, a surprisingly gracious gesture from him. Our narrator even clarified his actions before the second-year students, admitting he proposed the duel out of sheer enthusiasm for joining, only to be overwhelmed by their extraordinary prowess. Mary and her group observed their friend's courteous behavior, which left them somewhat perplexed. Ultimately, Roman dipped in a respectful bow before the quartet, seeking forgiveness for his earlier boldness and requesting their future guidance. Naruto, Karam, and Irina were stunned into silence by his words. Brown broke the quiet, overjoyed to discover Roman's true character, noting his strength was matched by his politeness. Approaching the host, Brown clasped his hand, reassuring Roman that his humility was unnecessary since he had merely showcased his skills. Braun then lifted Roman's arm high, proclaiming his victory as a true testament to the spirit of a Philian student. The host began forging a strong connection with his peers, a deliberate move to demonstrate his social finesse to his sister. And indeed, he succeeded. Yarrow was already in tears, marveling at how much her little brother had matured, while the guy next to her, whose shirt had become an off-shoulder mess, seemed rather pitiful. Amid this heartfelt scene, an enigmatic student took notice of Roman's presence. This stranger found the host to be a remarkably intriguing figure. That evening, all students had retired to their dorms. They savored a lavish dinner meticulously prepared by the academy. The feast made them feel that their efforts to pass the entrance exam were entirely worthwhile. Roman, Marcel, and Mary were also relishing the grand banquet. The host had anticipated a fine meal, but its splendor far exceeded his expectations. Mary remarked that such extravagance was only fitting for the Empire's premier institution. SL shifted the conversation, inquiring about Roman's sister, learning that the host had already seen her off. He recalled the effort it took to convince her he'd be safe at the academy. Roman had entrusted a spirited baby dragon to accompany her, ensuring her safety on the journey home. SL commended Roman for being such a devoted brother. Just as the host was about to sample the exquisite dishes prepared by Phelan, a figure appeared beside him, exuding a strange, unsettling vibe, questioning how Roman could eat at such a moment. Turning to the voice, Roman found Sullivan's face uncomfortably close. That was the final straw. Roman's irritation flared, unable to even enjoy his meal in peace. He sharply asked Shireen what his problem was and what he wanted now. The noble replied he was merely verifying something crucial. Shireen pulled out a notebook and pen, posing personal questions about where Errol lived and whether it was far from the academy. He was probing the safety of the roads near their home, leaving Roman baffled by the barrage of questions. For his final inquiry, Shireen asked if Roman had arranged guards to escort his sister back to their village. Exasperated, Rohan snapped at Saipem, confirming he'd already taken every precaution, even ensuring the escorts were more formidable than Shilpa. He added that nothing short of a wyvern ambushing her carriage could pose a threat. This remark ignited Sharp's anger, who feared that a wyvern's appearance would genuinely endanger Errol. The host cut to the chase, demanding why Charlotte Bond was so invested in his sister's safety, pointing out he wasn't even her betrothed. That comment silenced the noble, sealing the moment. Sharp, regaining composure, insisted he was merely concerned for her well-being. As their tense exchange continued, a woman with striking purple hair entered the dining hall. She grinned, finding the confrontation rather amusing. She remarked that she'd never seen the granite wolf so chatty before. Sharp spun toward her, sharply asking what she wanted with him. The woman introduced herself as Elizabeth Ocalusa, a fellow freshman from the magic class. Smirking, Elizabeth clarified that Sharp had misunderstood her intentions. She revealed she was there for Rohan, not him. The host was stunned, as he had no clue who she was. He double-checked if he'd heard her correctly. Sharp, meanwhile, stayed quiet, scrutinizing Elizabeth's actions. With a sigh, he muttered that she was likely up to her devious tricks again. Done with his safety inquiries, Sharp announced his departure, leaving Elizabeth to her schemes. But before exiting, he paused once more. Turning back, he urged Rohan to send additional guards for Errol, further irritating the host. Someone then tried to catch Rohan's attention. It was Marcel, about to reveal the identity of the woman before them, but Rohan waved him off, saying it wasn't necessary. The host already knew Elizabeth was a formidable mage. Her earlier battle had been a crushing victory over her seniors. Each spell she cast brimmed with immense mana. One had even triggered an explosion that damaged part of the Colosseum. Elizabeth spoke up, telling Rohan that those who bear their claws need to be disciplined. She hoped he understood her meaning, but Rohan, clueless, pressed her again about her purpose. Moving closer with deliberate steps, she praised his remarkable talent. With an eerie smile, she hinted at a proposition for Rohan. Elizabeth reached into her pocket. She claimed the offer was so extraordinary that someone like Rohan, labeled a criminal, couldn't possibly refuse, revealing a shimmering purple necklace. Rohan's eyes widened in shock at the sight of it. The purple necklace signified an invitation from Lucia. Unlike most nobles who valued lineage, the exclusives prized talent above all else. Through this approach, they've nurtured countless gifted individuals, solidifying their status as one of the empire's two foundational pillars. They typically extend their badge to those who exhibit exceptional potential, inviting them to join their esteemed family. Now, that very invitation was presented to our host, Rohan, who held an object capable of unlocking the resources he needed to grow stronger. Rohan questioned Elizabeth about her authority to offer the badge, prompting a knowing smile from her, as she sensed he already understood its significance. He brushed it off, claiming he'd overheard its purpose from a random passerby. This triggered a memory of someone pivotal from his past life. It was during his time at a battle camp. The person before him had displayed the same badge Elizabeth now offered. Back then, Rohan, a mere peasant, had asked if he could join such a prestigious family despite his lowly status. That person was his Grand Commander, Adeline Nicole Lucia, who assured him that with the badge, anything was possible. She explained that a patriarch's test would follow to verify a candidate's worth, but those chosen for the badge were typically talented enough to pass. Adeline had also hinted that if Rohan atoned for his past sins through wartime achievements, he might earn such an invitation. Rohan was breathless at the prospect of such a life-changing opportunity. His Grand Commander had emphasized that he possessed the exact kind of talent the Lucius sought. Back in the present, Rohan gazed at the badge, the moment he'd dreamed of since his past life now unfolding before him. Elizabeth chose not to elaborate, trusting that Rohan grasped the invitation's weight and simply urged him to choose wisely. She remarked that even a beast like Rohan could transform into a sheep with enough time among them. With pride in her voice, she departed with her entourage, leaving Rohan to ponder his decision. To Rohan, geniuses always seemed to act on their whims, unaware that he shared a similar streak. Meanwhile, SL sighed in relief as Elizabeth's daunting presence faded. In his mind, Rohan saw this as a golden opportunity, a direct line to a powerful family. Staring at the badge, he knew it would prove invaluable and planned to leverage this connection strategically. Phelan Academy, an institution that values skill above all, shapes students' lives based on their academic performance. The dormitories vividly illustrate this principle. Mid-tier students are housed in Shire Hall, a comfortable residence. Each student enjoys a tidy room, access to a top-notch cafeteria, and excellent amenities, making it an ideal living space. Conversely, the bottom 30% are relegated to Crater Hall, a dilapidated dormitory in stark contrast. New students often begin their academy journey with complaints, grumbling loudly about their assigned quarters. He boasted of his noble lineage, insisting he shouldn't be forced to reside in such a run-down place. The staff member overseeing Crater Hall remained unfazed, as if anticipating this outburst, and clarified that no servants would attend to the residents there. Additionally, rooms would house 4 students each with shared cafeteria, showers, and bathrooms. He stressed that these were the academy's unyielding rules, advising the complainers to study diligently. Otherwise, they risked remaining in Crater Hall for the next semester. Meanwhile, the top 10% of students, including Rohan, were assigned to the luxurious Nevada's Hall. Rohan's jaw dropped as he beheld the grandeur of this place. In the Chronicles of Phelan Academy, Nevada's Hall was infamously dubbed Seeker's Hell for its opulence. Every detail inside screamed extravagance, resembling a royal palace. Rohan pondered why the academy lavished such rewards on top students. But then he spotted something. There were forms for students to complete, registering for their desired classes. He realized he simply needed to list his chosen courses on the timetable. Recalling advice given to freshmen to focus on settling in during the first semester and avoid overloading on subjects, Rohan considered his options. Yet, as he scanned the class list, a grin spread across his face. Every course seemed too enticing to pass up. Defiant, he made the bold decision to break convention and enroll in all of them. Minutes later, Rohan looked pleased, having completed the forms with confidence. He admitted it might be excessive, but he refused to squander such opportunities. At Phelan Academy, he was determined to seize every class that piqued his interest. As the day progressed, Rohan attended his first class. However, the instructor of Empire Swordsmanship Basics, Master Abba, declared that Rohan's time in the class was already over. Stunned, Rohan protested, confused since the class had just begun, and he hadn't learned anything yet. He demanded an explanation, and Abba, with a grin, clarified his reasoning. He pointed out that Rohan had already demonstrated mastery of the Empire's swordsmanship fundamentals. Per Academy rules, students who completed the syllabus were required to leave the class. Abba added that keeping Rohan would discourage others, whose slower progress might pale in comparison. With a warm smile and a thumbs up, the professor encouraged Rohan to move on to greater challenges. The day flew by, and later, Rohan sat by a tranquil lake. A cloud of gloom hung over him, his disappointment from the day's events weighing heavily. It wasn't just the swordsmanship class that had dismissed him. The archery course had also sent him packing. The same happened in the monster hunting class. Rohan's face twisted with frustration as he recalled being ousted by every professor, grumbling that this was not the academy experience he'd envisioned. While he vented, a voice from behind questioned why he wasn't in class. Spinning around, Rohan instantly recognized the speaker. It was Instructor Navi Rose, who approached and stood beside him. With a knowing smile, Instructor Navarro deduced that Rohan was out here because he'd already mastered all his classes. Rohan confirmed her guess, questioning if every course at the academy was meant to be this way. He complained that he'd expected more from Phelan, but as he rambled, Navarro thought to herself that this was typical of Rohan's extraordinary talent. His ability to instantly replicate any technique after a single glance made completing all classes in one day almost predictable. Navarro declared that, as a Phylan instructor, she couldn't simply ignore his potential. She extended her hand, asking Rohan to hand over his sword. Though puzzled, he complied, and Navarro announced she was about to impart a crucial lesson. Rohan opened his mouth to ask about her taking his sword, but before he could finish, a powerful blast shot past him. The blast hit the lake, triggering an explosion that left Rohan stunned. He was utterly baffled by what had just happened. Still in awe, Navarro remarked that this was the limit of a mere chunk of metal. She added that such a sword shouldn't be called a true weapon, as it only drained its wielder's strength. Rohan listened intently, sensing he was on the verge of learning something profound. Navarro instructed him to watch closely as she reached for her own sword, the air around them shifting with sudden intensity. The tension peaked as she drew her blade. Rohan's eyes widened in disbelief at what he witnessed. With a swift slash, Instructor Navarro unleashed a surge of power that was nothing short of staggering. The force of her attack swept past Rohan, slicing the lake behind him as if it had been cleaved in two. The power Navarro unleashed with her own weapon far surpassed what she'd done with Rohan's sword. Droplets of water rained gently onto Rohan's hair. Silence blanketed the area after her breathtaking display. With a calm expression, Navarro asked if Rohan had grasped the lesson she intended. This formidable instructor revealed to him the key area where he still needed growth. That area was none other than wielding a personalized weapon. These finely crafted razor-sharp blades were what true warriors used to face their foes. Weapons should hold strong under use, and if they break, warriors could simply replace them. Essentially, they were disposable. That had been Rohan's view until Navarro's demonstration shattered his perspective. A perfectly suited weapon could amplify a warrior's power and potential exponentially. To Rohan, this realization seemed almost absurd. He was certain Navarro had used his sword for the same slash, yet her own blade produced a strike leagues beyond his. Cutting through his thoughts, Navarro remarked that a single breath or ounce of strength could be the difference between life and death on the battlefield, where no detail was too small. She added that if Rohan intended to wield mana, he'd need a weapon tailored to him, though she noted he wouldn't grasp this fully until he could actually use mana. Rohan's hand twitched as he absorbed her words. He asked if she'd known this about him all along, and she nodded, praising his remarkable skill despite his current inability to use mana. Navarro assured him that he'd one day harness mana's power. To prepare, she ordered him to find a weapon perfectly suited to him. Rohan fell silent, his mind racing, prompting Navarro to note he had much to process. Then, unexpectedly, she invited him to join her class, an offer that caught him off guard. Rohan confirmed if he could truly attend, and Navarro affirmed, despite her class typically being for second years and above. Before leaving, she stressed that he couldn't bring his current lump of steel to her class. He needed a proper weapon as her sole condition. The next day, the city basked in pleasant weather. Rohan, joined by Marcel and Mary, stood before a wooden sign, recounting his encounter with Navarro and their mission to find him a new weapon. To begin, Rohan sought the forge Navarro had previously recommended. Following her directions, he hesitated as they led to a ramshackle blacksmith shop. Marcel and Mary doubted this was the right place, joking it might collapse with a nudge and questioning if this was truly the forge favored by the Sword Saint. With a hesitant smile, Rohan admitted he believed it was, suggesting they'd confirm once inside. The trio pushed open the door. Inside, they were greeted by damp cobwebs clinging to the ceiling. The interior looked even more dilapidated and underwhelming than the exterior. Only Navarro's words kept Rohan from leaving. He trusted the Sword Saint wouldn't mislead him. A door creaked open, revealing a hairy hand with long nails, its owner grumbling about the sudden noise. The heavy stomp of hairy feet echoed through the shop. A massive creature loomed before Rohan's group, demanding to know who they were, causing them to freeze momentarily. As the creature spoke, Marcel was visibly rattled, while Rohan remarked with intrigue that this was quite a spectacle. The speaker was a wolf beastman, an unusual figure to be running a forge. Growing irritated by their silence, the wolf snapped, asking if they were deaf. He was ready to shoo them away, but paused when Rohan presented the token from Siphon, explaining they were there to purchase a premium weapon. Rohan added that Siphon had highly recommended this forge for its superior craftsmanship. The wolf's interest piqued upon seeing the Granja family's symbol in Rohan's possession. Scrutinizing the group further, he sensed the potent mana emanating from Marcel and Mary. With a sly grin, the wolf teased that the symbol meant little, unless Rohan was truly a Granja. Yawning dismissively, he told Rohan to leave, claiming they didn't serve customers like him, escalating the tension. Rohan tried to negotiate, but the wolf stood firm until a sudden idea struck him. Licking his lips, he proposed that if Rohan offered Marcel's arm, he might consider fulfilling their request. The wolf, hungry and sensing Rohan's desperation, thought it a worthwhile gamble, while Marcel cowered behind Rohan. While the wolf chuckled at his own jest, Rohan's expression darkened. In a stern voice, he addressed the wolf, his tone icy. Gripping his weapon, Rohan warned that the wolf had crossed a dangerous line. In a flash, Rohan struck, landing a clean hit the wolf couldn't evade. The wolf groaned in pain, reeling from the unexpected blow. It was hurled several meters back, stunned by the attack. Rohan smirked, noting a familiar sensation from his strike. He asked the wolf where he'd gotten such sturdy armor, recognizing its resistance. Still coughing, the wolf now wore visible defensive armor that hadn't been there before. Unfazed, Rohan advanced, declaring the armor irrelevant. With a furious glare, he vowed to shatter the armor, causing the wolf to panic. The beastman begged for mercy, admitting it was all a test. He explained he was following protocol to assess unfamiliar visitors, specifically to gauge Rohan's skill. The wolf confessed he'd provoked them deliberately to test his new invisible armor. Calming down, Rohan realized the wolf meant no real harm and found his explanation oddly creative. He decided the beastman's test, while unorthodox, held a certain originality. Rohan wasn't fully convinced the wolf was truthful, but the beastman argued it would be suspicious if the Granja family's blacksmith lacked such a vetting process. He told Rohan that if he still had doubts, he could verify the truth later himself. The wolf offered another apology for his overly aggressive test. He also begged Marcel's forgiveness, clarifying he had no real taste for human flesh. Marcel gave an awkward smile, visibly relieved by the assurance. After the tense introduction, the wolf revealed his name as Dakan, an apprentice blacksmith who occasionally doubled as the forge's gatekeeper. Dakan asked for Rohan's name and confirmed his intent to acquire a custom weapon. He invited them to follow him deeper inside, explaining that the dingy area was merely the entrance to their true workshop. The actual forging area lay beyond a door ahead of them. Stepping inside, Dakan checked if the group was ready. He warned them to brace themselves as he pressed a hidden button on the wall. Gears whirred to life, filling the space with the sound of a massive mechanism in motion. Moments later, the room shuddered as it began to descend. Rohan and his companions stared at the ceiling as they sank downward. Dakan explained it was a magic stone-powered elevator with a pulley system, the quickest route to the forge. As they descended, Rohan's attention shifted forward. A sprawling new area unveiled itself, which Dakan called the Grand Carpent Donjon. Rohan marveled, never imagining such a place existed beneath the capital, and Dakan chuckled in agreement. The wolf urged Rohan to get excited, promising to show him something truly spectacular. Rohan's curiosity surged at the prospect. As a reward for passing his test, Dakan had decided to offer Rohan the ultimate prize. He would introduce him to a dwarf, the capital's most renowned master craftsman. The blacksmith's hammer struck with incredible force, shaping metal with precision. Numerous smiths worked tirelessly at their anvils around them. Rohan was astonished that such an immense forge operated hidden beneath the capital. Dakan explained that their forge exclusively supplied the royal family and nobles, a hub of master craftsmen without bias. Among them, the elder dwarf in the building ahead was revered as the greatest, with 400 years of metalworking mastery. Dakan described him as stubborn but unmatched in skill, earning his deep respect. With that, he kicked open the door. Weapons lay strewn across the floor, and Dakan called out, asking what the elder was up to. He strode in, announcing he'd brought guests while the blacksmith hammered a glowing blade. The elder grumbled at Dakan's loud entrance, clearly annoyed by the disruption. He scolded Dakan to keep quiet while he worked, but the wolf paid little heed. Dakan shrugged, explaining he had to kick the door because weapons were blocking it from opening normally. He urged the blacksmith, whom he called Elder Doran, to tidy up, to which Doran retorted that Dakan nagged like an old man despite his youth. Shifting focus, Doran inquired about the guests Dakan brought, asking if they were any good, and Dakan confidently vouched for them. Pointing at Rohan, Dakan told Elder Doran he'd tested him, and his swordsmanship was exceptional, adding that the elder would be impressed. This revelation caught Doran off guard, and he muttered that it was surprising. Eyeing Rohan's youthful appearance, he remarked that he looked like a mere boy. Doran challenged Rohan to demonstrate his swordsmanship, claiming he could gauge his skill just by observing. Rohan, slightly rattled, agreed. He drew his sword, ready to comply. Doran glanced at the blade and burst into laughter. Calling it a piece of junk, he gave it a light tap with his hammer, and it shattered instantly, leaving Doran to ask if Rohan had been wielding that all along. Rohan, Marcel, and Mary stood in shock as the sword crumbled before their eyes. Furious, Rohan demanded an explanation for the elder's actions, but Doran calmly gestured behind him. He instructed Rohan to pick any sword from the collection there, as the broken one would have skewed any assessment of his true ability. Doran added that he'd gift Rohan the chosen sword to ensure fairness. He boasted that any sword from his forge was 100 times better than the trash Rohan had been using, sparking Rohan's curiosity. Rohan glanced at Dakan, who nodded encouragingly. With a hesitant, "Well, if you insist," Rohan selected a sword. Holding it, he sensed an entirely different aura from the weapon. Still skeptical, he wondered if it could truly make such a difference. He warned Doran that he wouldn't be responsible for any damage, and the elder nonchalantly agreed. Doran urged him to swing with full commitment, as if pouring his entire being into the strike. Rohan studied his reflection in the blade. His mind flashed back to his encounter with Instructor Navarro. He shifted into position, adopting a precise combat stance. The elder recognized the form instantly. With all his strength, Rohan swung the sword, mimicking Navarro's technique. The strike unleashed a colossal explosion, shattering parts of the building's structure. Onlookers outside traced the blast to Doran's workshop, stunned by the midday chaos. Some speculated a blast furnace had detonated. Yet there stood Doran and Rohan, with Marcel and Mary frozen in disbelief. A massive gash scarred the floor where the strike had landed. Bewildered, Rohan stammered, asking what had just happened. He insisted he hadn't meant to cause such destruction. Doran declared the technique was unmistakably Navarro's. He turned to Rohan, asking if he was her apprentice. Rohan asked Elder Doran if he was familiar with Instructor Navarro, and the elder nodded confidently, affirming he knew her well. He revealed he was the one who crafted her sword, surprising Rohan. Rohan clarified, asking if he meant that ridiculously long blade, and Doran confirmed with a grin. That blade, he explained, was the secret sword Ursa. Doran boasted it was among the finest masterpieces he'd forged in his lifetime. He noted that the sword Rohan held paled in comparison to Ursa, then asked how it felt to wield. Rohan admitted it was incredible. He confessed he hadn't expected much from it, prompting Doran to chuckle that Rohan, as a novice, underestimated his own skill. Thrilled, Doran said it had been ages since he'd seen such raw talent, slapping Rohan's back so hard it drew a groan. He warned that Rohan's exceptional skill posed a challenge, as crafting a sword to match his potential would be no easy task. The sword Rohan had just swung was already showing cracks, struggling to withstand his power. When Rohan asked what to do, Doran explained that ordinary materials wouldn't suffice. High-grade steel fused with a special component was needed. He mused that a wyvern byproduct might do, but when Rohan heard byproduct, something clicked in his mind. He pulled out an item, asking if it could work, and handed it to Doran. The elder examined it closely, realizing it was an eggshell. Though the front door of Doran's workshop remained intact, a gaping hole in the side wall was hard to miss. Doran began working, striking the eggshell with his hammer. To his disbelief, his mithril hammer couldn't even dent the shell, leaving him awestruck by its resilience. Amazed, he marveled at the existence of such a material. His passion ignited. He asked Rohan if he was truly okay parting with something so valuable, to which Rohan shrugged, saying it was useless to him and asked if it could make a sword. Doran, buzzing with excitement, confirmed it could and told Rohan to return in 2 weeks. He vowed to craft the Empire's finest sword, and Rohan replied he'd be eagerly awaiting it, while Marcel and Mary browsed the other weapons in the shop. Doran suggested they meet the other master craftsmen since they were already there, sparking excitement in the pair. He insisted he couldn't let the friends of such an important guest leave empty-handed, instructing them to mention his referral to the other masters for special treatment. Doran admitted he'd love to assist them further, but his focus was now on the eggshell. He couldn't do much else until he'd finished smelting it. Hammering away, he let out a hearty laugh, praising the satisfying sound of his work. Rohan and his friends watched, their faces a mix of amusement and disbelief, with Rohan privately thinking the old dwarf was a bit unhinged. Meanwhile, in a shadowy underground chamber, several torches flickered to life. A furious individual in a white hood grumbled that the people upstairs were being excessively noisy and irritating. He muttered that he was so fed up he could burn them all. But another figure in white robes urged him to stay calm, warning that their time to act hadn't yet come. They noted that the wait was nearly over. Deep within the subterranean stronghold, enormous stone statues loomed. The white-robed figure explained that, starting with those clueless blacksmiths and extending to the entire empire, a day was approaching when all would vanish, consumed by radiant light. They gazed at a colossal being with glowing red eyes, encased in a golden crystal. Several days later, Rohan strolled across the school courtyard. He remembered his meeting with Elder Dawn, the Empire's finest blacksmith, who had promised to craft him a sword. Meanwhile, Mary was busy hiring other local smiths. Rohan knew the costs were steep, but it wasn't his concern. With a grin, he pulled out the grain emblem, which covered all expenses since it wasn't his money. He'd settle everything with the emblem. The only issue was that the sword wouldn't be ready for another 2 weeks. Bored and pondering his next move, Rohan noted that Asil and Mary were currently in class. He paused to take in his surroundings. The area felt oddly familiar. It was the training facility reserved for upperclassmen. He stood before Galilean Hall. He knew it was where Instructor Navarro conducted her lessons. He'd been avoiding the place since she'd told him to bring a proper weapon first. But now he figured he had something temporary to use. As he debated whether to attend today, a menacing roar interrupted his thoughts. Glancing sideways, he froze in terror upon seeing Instructor Navarro. She grabbed his ear with force, greeting him with a sharp, "Haven't seen you in a while?" She reminded Rohan to attend class once he had a weapon and questioned why he'd been absent so often. Still pinching his ear, she accused him of ditching lessons. Rohan protested that he wasn't skipping. He insisted he had his reasons, but the instructor yanked him by the ear, ordering him to follow her. She said she'd hear his excuses on the way. Rohan pleaded that he understood and begged her to release him. He yelped in pain from the ear pinching. His loud cries drew the attention of a nearby student. The student approached the window to investigate the commotion. As she moved to check the noise, a male student collided with her, snapping at her for obstructing his path. She apologized to the student Cardin while gathering her scattered papers. He continued berating her for her sluggishness, despite her role as a teaching assistant. Cardin mocked her as dim-witted, suggesting that if she had time to daydream, she should hurry up and prepare for class. She nodded quietly and walked away. At the combat training arena, Instructor Navarro, standing beside Rohan, addressed the students. She remarked that his loud antics at the entrance ceremony likely made him familiar to many already. She officially presented Rohan to the group, announcing that he would be joining their class sessions. Rohan gave a polite bow, introducing himself as a first year from the martial arts department, humbly asking for their guidance. Whispers spread among the students. One wondered if he was the first year who secured second place, while another remarked that it was no surprise Rohan might skip a grade. Some, however, scoffed, sizing him up and doubting his skills based on his appearance. Inwardly, Rohan thought, "I can hear every word you're saying," but his mood lifted when he spotted familiar faces he was happy to see, along with one he'd rather avoid. He figured the class could be enjoyable, but his optimism faded when someone entered the room. A woman hurried in, apologizing for her tardiness, the same woman who'd heard his earlier outburst. As she approached the front, she explained she'd been delayed by an urgent task. Rohan recognized her voice instantly. She asked Navarro if she'd kept her waiting long. Navarro brushed it off, suggesting she catch her breath first. Navarro explained she'd just introduced a new student, gesturing toward Rohan. The woman nodded, aware he was the notable junior Navarro had mentioned. Navarro prompted Rohan to greet the teaching assistant. The woman turned to him, offering a warm smile and saying it was a pleasure to meet him. She introduced herself as a second-year martial arts student and the class's teaching assistant. Her name was Adeline. Extending her hand, she expressed hope that they'd get along. Rohan was stunned to realize the Grand Commander stood before him. Adeline was renowned for her unparalleled command, rising as the first female general, dominating battlefields with sharp judgment and exceptional leadership. Known as the Iron Lady, those under her command claimed molten iron, not blood, coursed through her veins. Because of this, Rohan found it astonishing to see the Grand Commander display such a cheerful, relaxed demeanor. Observing her closely, he sensed she had no memory of their past encounters. He wondered if this was the true face of the general from his first life. He recalled a favor she'd once asked of him, urging him to focus on tailoring rather than wasting time on trivial matters. Rohan felt conflicted, unsure of how to proceed. Setting that dilemma aside for now, he noticed something earlier that caught his attention. A student brusquely called out to Adeline, demanding she critique his fighting stance. Another rudely requested a spare handkerchief from her, and she hurried to assist more students. Rohan puzzled over why she was so overwhelmed, noticing she was handling tasks typically reserved for maids. He began to question whether this was the role of a teaching assistant. A classmate noticed Rohan's idle demeanor and suggested a friendly duel to liven things up. Ronan, caught off guard by the sudden challenge, received a quick apology for the abruptness. Introducing himself as Carden, a third year, the student praised Roland's rumored prowess at the initiation ceremony. Carden expressed curiosity about testing Roland's skills, but Ronan mentioned he was preoccupied with other matters. As Rohan started to propose rescheduling, Carden interrupted, admitting he'd forgotten his weapon when issuing the challenge. Carden turned to his assistant, addressing her sharply, and ordered her to fetch his practice spear. She nodded with a grin, promising a swift return. Roland's anger flared as the term loser rang painfully in his mind. His face darkened, seething at Carden's audacity to insult her. The assistant handed Carden his weapon, but he looked puzzled by her choice. Carden berated her for bringing a long spear, noting he'd switched to a shorter one ages ago. She apologized, explaining she'd seen him use the long spear recently. Carden's irritation grew, his patience wearing thin with her mistake. He struck her head with the spear, scolding her for arguing and mocking her role as teaching assistant, claiming she was unfit for their class. Continuing, he tapped her head again, sneering that her begging to join the class should have at least made her competent at tasks, questioning her integrity. She muttered an apology. Nick stood by, silently observing the heated exchange. Roman gripped the spear's shaft tightly. The assistant froze, stunned by his bold intervention. Carden snapped at Roman, demanding why he was interfering. But Roman insisted they proceed with the duel as suggested. He warned Carden that refusal might lead to unpredictable consequences, leaving Carden baffled. Roman, exasperated, questioned Carden's failure to grasp the situation. With a scowl, Roman challenged Carden to a duel, calling him out with fiery intensity. Carden remarked that the outburst was unexpected and jarring. He asked Roman if he'd misheard and what had provoked him. Noticing Roman's furious glare, Carden pieced things together. He realized Roman's anger stemmed from defending the assistant, whom he called a loser, and asked if they were acquainted. Carden taunted, wondering if their shared commoner status bonded them. He sarcastically remarked that Roman and the assistant might as well be twins, a fact he claimed ignorance of. Roman released the spear abruptly. He told Carden to shut his mouth or face serious consequences. With a menacing look, Roman warned Carden to comply or regret it. Roman swung his sword fiercely. Carden struggled to parry with his spear. Carden faltered under the onslaught, noticing something alarming. Cracks appeared in his spear, and Carden marveled at Roman's raw strength, achieved without mana. Roman's power sent Carden staggering backward. The spear snapped clean in two. Roman mocked Carden's complaints about the weapon, saying he'd fixed it for him, as if doing him a favor. Roman taunted Carden, questioning if he was truly as skilled as he boasted. Carden's fury boiled over, unable to restrain his rage. He lunged at Roland, shouting that he needed to learn his place. As the spear closed in on Roman, he remained unfazed. Carden sneered, asking if he thought he'd escape unharmed. The spear's tip hovered just an inch from Roland's face. In a flash, Roman shattered it with a deft move. The weapon split into several clean fragments, leaving Carden stunned, while Roman coolly replied, "Yeah, I'll be fine." Carden stood frozen, unable to process the moment. Roman kept talking, advising Carden to focus on his own survival. He unleashed a flurry of swift sword strikes. With a mighty blow, he sent Carden reeling backward with tremendous force. Roman pressed his attack relentlessly. He delivered a barrage of powerful swings. Gripping his sword with both hands, he readied a devastating strike. With a rapid swing, he struck Carden's body and jaw. Carden groaned, his face swollen from the impact. His body crashed to the ground with a heavy thud. Roman, with a fierce glare, remarked that Carden was fortunate their clash occurred within the academy's walls. Outside these grounds, Carden's fate would have been far grimmer. Spectators were astonished that Carden, a top-ranked third year, had been defeated. Rohan scanned the crowd, selecting his next challenger. He pointed at a student holding a towel. Stepping closer, he reprimanded the student, saying if the towel reeked, he should clean it himself instead of delegating. Rohan nearly addressed the assistant as Grand Commander, but corrected himself to Assistant Instructor, questioning if the student saw her as a servant. The student trembled, overcome with fear. Roman beckoned him forward, threatening to rearrange his face, but the assistant intervened. She pleaded with Roman, confused by his actions, assuring him she was unharmed and urging him to calm down. Roman, barely containing his fury, told her to step aside, stating he could tolerate many things but not her being disrespected. With a stern look, Roman vowed that no one, not these fools or anyone else, could belittle her. He thought of the Grand Commander, reflecting that even in the Empire she deserved reverence. Her status demanded respect, not the scorn she'd received. Gently brushing past her, Roman politely asked her to move, declaring he'd keep fighting until he humbled every offender. The tension shifted as Navarro's commanding voice rang out, ordering everyone to halt. Her presence enveloped Roman, snapping him back to reality. She approached, exuding an intimidating aura. Navarro assured Roman he wouldn't face punishment for the duel, as sparring mishaps mimicked the chaos of real combat. Her gaze, fierce as a coiled serpent, silenced the crowd. It was as if a serpentine, scaled form coiled around Navarro, her face stern as she warned Roman that further escalation would not be ignored. She ordered him to lower his sword and leave, but Roman found himself frozen in place. A look of dread crossed his face as he glanced backward. He saw an enormous serpent, poised as if ready to swallow him whole. Its flickering tongue nearly grazed his cheek. Roman realized this was the formidable sword saint, Instructor Navarro. Navarro declared that his actions could no longer be excused as mere sparring, and as the class instructor, she couldn't allow the lesson to spiral further. The situation had already gone too far. Roman shot back that Navarro must have been aware of the mistreatment her assistant endured. Gripping his sword tightly, he accused Navarro of standing idly by despite knowing the truth. She retorted that it was a matter between her and her assistant, not his concern. Her eyes blazed as she issued a final warning for him to stand down. Roman locked eyes with her, his gaze equally intense. He declared that her title as the renowned sword saint meant nothing to him. Pointing his sword at her, he stood firm in his resolve. With a scowl, he challenged her authority outright. Navarro sighed, remarking that reasoning with him was futile. She summoned the spectral serpent, its jaws gaping as if to engulf Roman. Roman grinned, a verdant aura swirling around him. His mind drifted to a past moment when he asked the Grand Commander why she chose the burdensome role of commander when others refused. She had replied that he'd understand in time. She explained that some duties cannot be forced upon others. They are tied to one's own path and fate. Her words echoed vividly in his mind, leaving him to ponder her thoughts. He recalled standing with her before a mound of fallen soldiers, wondering what weight she bore. The Grand Commander had turned to him, offering a heartfelt apology. She expressed regret for placing such a heavy burden on him. She urged him not to forgive her for it. Roman jolted awake, shouting, "No!" He was gasping for breath. A voice asked what troubled him. A woman inquired if he'd had a nightmare, startling Roman as he recognized her. He stared at the Grand Commander, who gazed back. He had called her name upon waking. The assistant was taken aback by his words. She pressed him to explain what he meant. Roman chuckled, dismissing it as a mistake, and told her not to dwell on it, though she remained visibly puzzled. He asked if he was in the clinic. The assistant confirmed, noting Navarro had instructed her to bring him there. She shared that Navarro intended to address his behavior in remedial classes. Upon hearing this, Roman's heart sank, realizing he'd crossed a line and Navarro would likely make him pay dearly. After relaying Navarro's message, the assistant asked Roman if his fight with Navarro was fueled by anger on her behalf. Roman flinched, caught off guard by her question. Avoiding her gaze, he claimed he fought because he's a principled man who values respect. The assistant instantly saw through his lie, calling him a terrible deceiver. She urged Roman not to harbor too much resentment toward Cardin and the other students. She explained she understood why they mistreated her, leaving Roman stunned and visibly upset by her words. Roman insisted she'd done nothing wrong beyond diligently serving as a teaching assistant. He questioned why she even took on the role of assistant in the first place, catching her by surprise. Roman acknowledged that Navarro might excuse the students' behavior due to their youth and impulsiveness. However, he refused to accept an instructor ignoring the blatant misconduct of her students. He asked the assistant if she wasn't furious with Navarro for her inaction. The assistant smiled gently, advising Roman not to misjudge the situation. She revealed that Navarro's indifference was at her own request, shocking Roman, who thought she was speaking nonsense. The assistant admitted she was receiving privileges she hadn't earned, explaining that Navarro's class required sword expert status, which she hadn't achieved despite a year's leave. Roman was astonished, struggling to reconcile this with the commanding aura he'd seen in her as the Grand Commander on the battlefield. He couldn't fathom that someone with such presence once felt powerless. The assistant clarified that she had asked Navarro to overlook the student's treatment of her. She made this request to avoid burdening Navarro, who had graciously accepted her as an assistant. She explained to Roman that enduring humiliation was the price she paid for the privileges she received. She reassured him that she could handle it and told him not to worry. She expressed gratitude for his defense of her honor. She admitted she thought she'd grown numb to the petty slights. But today, the insults had stung more than usual. A heavy silence settled over the room. Roman asked if her perseverance through such trials was driven by her ambition to become Grand Commander. The assistant's eyes widened, surprised by his insight. She wondered how Roman had discerned her deepest aspiration. With a warm smile, she confirmed her dream was to become the Grand Commander of the Empire. She acknowledged that her goal might seem foolish for someone not yet a sword expert, but she had no intention of abandoning it. She shared that her strength lay in military strategy and tactics. She was tirelessly working toward her ambition. Realizing the time, she noted she needed to hurry to her next class. She advised Roland to rest thoroughly before returning to his studies. Roland expressed gratitude for her care and concern. The nurse smiled warmly, reassuring him there was no need to fret. After their exchange, she departed the clinic, leaving Roland to reflect on her final moments. He recalled her words, urging him to tell her younger self, should they meet in the past, to abandon her ambition of becoming a Grand Commander and embrace a career in tailoring. Her face lit with a gentle smile. She confessed to Roland that, despite her many endeavors, tailoring remained an unexplored path. Roland found himself torn, unsure how to convince her to forsake her dreams for a tailor's life. Several days later, Roland, Ansel, and Maria ventured to the forge at the entrance of Grand Carpet Doki. They went because Dawn had summoned them for a meeting. Yet when Roland and his companions reached the forge's entrance, no one was there. Roland's frustration flared as Dawn had sent a midnight message via carrier pigeon. In the note, Dawn claimed he'd crafted a masterpiece and urged them to collect it. While scanning the area, Roland's foot struck a stray helmet. Irritated, he kicked it aside, grumbling about the forge's filthy state and poor hospitality. Maria, taken aback by Roland's outburst, asked Ansel why he seemed so on edge lately. Ansel admitted he was clueless about Roland's mood. Roland declared they'd have to enter the forge themselves, surprising Ansel and Maria. Maria questioned if such an action was permitted, but Roland reminded her of Dawn's invitation, sharply telling her to follow without further debate. They entered the elevator, and Roland activated a hidden switch. As the elevator began its descent, Roland insisted he'd been right all along. While descending, he ranted about Dawn's age and deplorable customer service, vowing to confront him. Maria and Ansel were stunned by their friend's erratic behavior. As the elevator sank deeper, Roland caught sight of something astonishing. The entire Grand Carpet Doki was consumed by roaring flames. Bewildered, Roland couldn't comprehend the chaos unfolding below. His gaze fell on people collapsed, unconscious, across the ground. Ansel urgently drew Roland's attention to a startling sight. A massive rock giant was pursuing the forge's blacksmiths. Confused by the presence of rock giants in the forge, Ansel looked to Roland for guidance. Roland swiftly hoisted Ansel by the waist, lifting him off the ground. He braced one foot against the elevator's railing, readying for a leap. Ansel was utterly perplexed by the unfolding events. Turning to Maria, Roland instructed her to ascend and summon any master or soldier she could find. She obeyed, without hesitation. Roland then leapt from the elevator. He urged Ansel to employ his telekinetic abilities. Ansel promptly activated his skill, known as the Invisible Hand. The scene transitions to the blacksmiths, cornered and moments from being crushed by a towering rock giant. The rampaging beast raised its massive fists, poised to strike. Thankfully, Roland vaulted over the giant's hulking form, shattering its hand with a powerful blow as he landed. Caught off guard, the creature stood bewildered, unable to react. Roland turned to the blacksmiths, admitting his mind was clouded with troubles lately, leaving him on edge. With a fierce glare, he warned the giant it had picked the worst day to wreak havoc. Unfazed, the rock giant swung its other massive fist at Roland. The creature's blow hurtled toward our hero. Roland, unflinching, held his stern expression, motionless. Yet, as the fist neared, he vanished in an instant. Dodging the attack, Roland sprang onto the giant's arm, using it as a springboard to reach its shoulder. In a flash, he obliterated the giant's head with a single strike. The beast couldn't comprehend the swift defeat. Its severed head crashed to the ground, triggering a massive explosion across the area. The blacksmiths, saved by Roland, were astonished that someone so young could fell a rock giant in one blow, recognizing him from his prior visit to Elder Doran. Roland then commanded their attention. Climbing atop the fallen giant, he demanded answers from the blacksmiths. Desperate for clarity, Roland sought to understand the chaos unfolding. As they spoke, Ansel joined the group, listening intently. Roland was stunned by the blacksmith's account. Dozens of rock giants had stormed the forge. The craftsmen admitted they had no clue why the giants attacked. Emerging from some underground lair, the giants destroyed everything in their path. They killed or captured several blacksmiths, including Dawn. After seizing their prisoners, the giants retreated to their hidden origin. The elders added that a werewolf had pursued the giants, but, being a poor fighter, was likely in peril. Roland's face darkened, realizing the captured blacksmiths might soon become the giants' prey. After learning the situation, Roland asked if the giant he'd slain was the last. The blacksmiths confirmed it was. Roland instructed Ansel to join Maria and search for injured survivors, ordering him to heal anyone they found. He also told Ansel to take Zita along to aid in the healing efforts. Ansel, shocked, asked what Roland planned to do. Roland declared he would rescue the captured blacksmiths, especially since he needed something from Dawn. The scene shifts to Elder Doran, trembling as he clutched a sword. He told Dedrican that while he appreciated the rescue attempt, Dedrican should flee from the advancing rock giants. As the giants forced their way through a narrow passage toward Doran and Dedrican, Doran pleaded with Dedrican to escape, insisting his invisible armor would ensure his survival. Frustrated, the werewolf snapped at Elder Doran to be quiet, growling that the situation was already dire without Doran's panicked ramblings. With a scowl, Dedrican snapped at Doran, telling him to swing his sword if he had the energy to spout such absurdities. Elder Doran, however, protested that he couldn't wield the blade as it was his finest creation. Eyes gleaming with awe, he explained he didn't want to tarnish the sword with his mediocre skills. Dedrican, exasperated, called Doran a peculiar old man, insisting this was no time for sword obsession. As they argued, the rock giants gradually broke through their hiding place. The barriers gave way, and the giants stormed in. One rock giant raised its colossal fist high, aiming directly at them. Its hand crashed down with earth-shaking force, but something inexplicably halted the blow. Doran, certain of their doom, was stunned by what he saw. Dedrican had blocked the giant's attack, though the werewolf clearly suffered heavy damage in the process. Dedrican realized the protective enchantments of his armor had been shattered in that single strike. As the rock giant withdrew its hand, Dedrican, grateful to survive, mused that he should have lived life without regrets. Lost in his thoughts, the werewolf failed to notice a swift figure darting nearby. While Dedrican lamented his unfulfilled dreams, someone wielding a sword appeared behind the rock giants. Frozen in awe, Dedrican witnessed an astonishing sight. A flurry of crimson slashes cut through the air, executed in a mere instant. The rock giants collapsed to the ground, and a voice commended Dedrican for his efforts. The figure who dispatched the giants was none other than Roland, who assured Dedrican he could now relax, as he would take charge. Both Elder Doran and Dedrican were astounded to see Roland before them. Dedrican, baffled, asked how Roland reached them through the swarm of giants. Roland grinned, revealing he'd slain every rock giant in his path. He had also rescued the remaining blacksmiths. Dedrican and Doran were incredulous, struggling to believe such a feat was possible. Roland extended his hand, asking Doran for the new sword, as his own was too damaged to use. He'd overheard Doran call it a masterpiece, confirming it was the blade he sought. Doran handed over the sword, noting the hilt was unfinished but the blade was functional. Roland thanked him with a smile. Taking a stance, he drew the sword from its sheath. He pondered the true potential of his new weapon. At that moment, more rock giants poured into the cave. They charged at Roland, but he didn't act immediately, considering a light swing to test the sword. With a simple motion, he unleashed a massive crimson slash. The giants froze, stunned by the sheer force of the attack hurtling toward them. The slash struck, obliterating the rock giants and sending them flying. Roland stood in awe, marveling at the extraordinary power of his new sword. Dedrican was stunned by the spectacle before him, while Elder Doran beamed with pride over his creation. Roland, still gripping the sword, marveled at its craftsmanship. Elder Doran approached Dedrican and asked Roland if he was fond of Lamantia, the sword's name. Roland, surprised, learned Doran named it after his favorite daydreamer. With enthusiasm, Doran explained that Lamantia was so light it barely felt heavy in the hand, forged from a material stronger than mithril, capable of enduring any swordplay. The old blacksmith added that, despite lacking enchantments, the sword already possessed a remarkable ability. Lamantia began absorbing the blood of the fallen rock giants. Doran revealed to Roland that the blade could repair its own damage by drawing in blood. Roland speculated if this power stemmed from Lamantia being crafted from a cetus eggshell. Impressed, Roland told Doran he was even more extraordinary than anticipated. Doran, delighted, said he was pleased Roland approved of the sword. Meanwhile, Dedrican, baffled, couldn't fathom why Roland and Doran were exchanging compliments in such dire circumstances. Dedrican warned Roland that they were the only blacksmiths left and urged them to leave the cave. Roland felt a wave of relief, but instead of joining them, he instructed Dedrican to escort Elder Doran to safety, saying he had something to investigate. Dedrican pressed Roland for details. Roland took a deep breath, brushing it off as a minor matter. His expression darkened as he declared there was a rat lurking in the cave, and this rat was a formidable threat. He hinted at two mysterious figures orchestrating the chaos. Dedrican, puzzled by the metaphor, didn't grasp what Roland meant by rat. The werewolf asked for clarification, and Roland revealed he sensed something amiss. He explained that rock giants weren't known for aggression or coordinated attacks. In fact, they were typically docile creatures. Roland then touched the corpse of a rock giant. It began to tremble, startling Doran and Dedrican, as something odd protruded from the back of the giant's head. Moments later, a glowing magic circle materialized. Roland remarked it was the first time he'd seen such a thing on these creatures. He urged Elder Doran to examine it, but Doran admitted he wasn't well versed in such matters. Still, Doran noted the mana emanating from the circle felt cunning and unnatural. Sweat beaded on Doran's brow as he concluded this magic was why the rock giants had turned feral. Both he and Roland pondered who could be behind it, but neither had answers. Roland's face grew grimmer as the conversation deepened. Studying the giants' footprints, he insisted they needed to uncover the truth. The cave continued to radiate an eerie chill. Roland, following the footprints, sprinted deeper into its shadowy depths. Roland remained uncertain, but something about the rock giants' footprints caught his attention. Among them were smaller, human-sized tracks, confirming that people had traveled the same path. He also stumbled upon defensive mechanisms like enchanted milestones clearly guarding something important. Piecing together the clues, Roland deduced that the attack was meticulously orchestrated. Moments later, something brought him to a sudden halt. He overheard voices engaged in conversation. Cautiously, Roland crept closer, concealing himself to identify the speakers. His face darkened as he peered around the corner, spotting a radiant, golden glow emanating from an object. It resembled a rock giant but was adorned with shimmering gemstones, far surpassing the others in grandeur. Two figures in white robes stood before it. Roland instantly suspected these two were the masterminds behind the recent chaos. The creature before them dwarfed the rock giants he'd fought, making them seem like mere children in comparison. Though it appeared sealed and immobile, Roland knew it would be catastrophic if unleashed. He flinched when one of the figures mentioned an intruder. The other questioned if their companion was certain, and they confirmed it. noting the brainwashing spell on the rock giants had been severed. The spellcaster, a blonde woman, stood beside a man with piercing red eyes, who remarked that the Empire's swift response was unexpected. He asked what their next move should be, as they had no more rock giants to control and couldn't yet activate the colossal creature. Running out of options, he proposed dealing with the intruder himself, his face radiating menace and dark energy. The woman, addressing him as Edwin, agreed, noting that their destruction of the surrounding facilities would cripple the Empire's weapon production. She warned that if their identities were exposed, a certain individual they knew would take action. Her name, Cirilo, was revealed, and she suggested they clean up and abandon the site. Regarding the cleanup, Edwin asked if he could eliminate something. Cirilo consented. The something Edwin referred to was none other than Roland. Roland's expression shifted as he realized the two had already detected him. Edwin explained he'd sensed Roland due to the faint scent of the smith's sulfur. Without hesitation, Edwin hurled a fireball directly at Roland. Caught off guard by their quick discovery, Roland couldn't react immediately. With no other choice, he steeled himself, clenching his jaw. A massive explosion erupted, shaking the area. Edwin let out a mocking laugh, remarking that the situation was unexpectedly entertaining. As the dust cleared, Roland's piercing glare cut through the haze. Seeing him unscathed, Edwin wondered aloud who this mysterious young warrior was. Flames still roared around Roland, casting an intense glow over the scene. Edwin remarked that Roland was remarkably nimble to evade his fireball spell. As he spoke, he conjured another barrage of fireballs, taunting Roland about whether he should bind his feet first. Roland eyed the incoming attack, realizing that anyone who could summon magic so swiftly was no ordinary foe. Edwin stepped closer, posing another question. He demanded to know how Roland breached their sophisticated defense system, which wasn't easily bypassed. Roland ignored the question, instead firing back with one of his own, asking who they were. With a smirk, Roland teased that if they were so eager for a meeting, the cave was an overly dramatic choice. Edwin, amused by Roland's quip, retorted that killing him now would make things more entertaining. Cirilo, however, snapped that they were wasting time. Edwin grinned, pleading with Cirilo to let him have some fun, as their time was running short. In a crazed tone, he spoke of the Empire, declaring that this place would soon be buried in starlight. Those words struck Roland like a lightning bolt, his expression darkening as memories flooded back. Buried in starlight echoed the final words spoken to him by someone dear before their death. The playful edge in Roland's voice vanished as he demanded Edwin repeat himself. Rage consumed Roland, his face taut with bulging veins, those words carrying a painful weight from his past. Edwin's smug demeanor faltered, sensing the ominous shift in Roland's aura. Brandishing his sword, Roland ordered them to come with him. He stated he had numerous questions they needed to answer. Edwin sneered, questioning whether Roland had the power to apprehend them both. Forming another fireball in his palm, he began to taunt Roland further. Before Edwin could finish, Roland lunged, slicing off his arm in a blur of motion. The attack was so swift that Edwin stood frozen, processing the pain as Roland confirmed it was indeed possible to capture them. His voice dripping with irritation, Roland warned them to comply or face dire consequences. Edwin collapsed, groaning in agony, clutching at his severed limb. Cirilo, meanwhile, stood paralyzed, unable to believe Edwin hadn't reacted in time. As she reeled, a hand suddenly appeared in her line of sight. Roland seized her by the throat. Showing no mercy, he tightened his grip despite her choking gasps. Staring into her eyes, Roland demanded she answer his questions obediently or end up like Edwin. Though struggling to breathe, Cirilo summoned her strength, her body enveloped in a radiant yellow glow. Cirilo unleashed a spell called Mana Shield, which forcefully repelled Roland backward. Unfazed, Roland interpreted her action as defiance, refusing to comply. Glancing at his trembling hand, he acknowledged the shield's impressive strength. However, it couldn't withstand his next assault. Two crimson slashes hurtled toward Cirilo. Her shocked expression betrayed her disbelief that a mere student could shatter her mana shield. In an instant, Roland's decisive strike landed, causing Cirilo to cough blood and cry out in pain. Roland fixed a cold stare on her, noticing something intriguing about her. Her pointed ears revealed she was a half-elf, prompting Roland to wonder how she became entangled with Edwin. While he focused on Cirilo, a strange phenomenon formed behind him, gathering flames. A voice shouted, "Explosion!" as a massive fireball surged toward him. The surprise attack didn't catch Roland off guard. He swiftly turned to face the spell. Swinging Lamantia, He unleashed a powerful slash that cleaved the fireball in two. The bisected flames redirected toward the colossal gem-encrusted creature behind them. Dust enveloped the area, obscuring the scene. Roland, bewildered, questioned how this was possible, certain he had severed Edwin's arm. The figure he referred to, Edwin, was now covered in a brown substance, rapidly regenerating his body. Fully restored, Edwin stood ready for battle, a sight Roland found deeply unsettling. Visibly irritated, Edwin demanded Roland back away from Cirillo. The air grew thick with tension, as if a single misstep could seal their fates. Roland broke the silence, stabbing Cirillo's leg and admitting he still didn't fully understand the situation. Seeing his comrade in peril, Edwin grew cautious, hesitating as they were at a disadvantage. With a stern expression, Roland made it clear that the two had gravely miscalculated. He stabbed Cirillo again, presenting Edwin with a choice. Edwin could either answer Roland's questions obediently or watch Cirillo face amputation, wondering if she could regenerate like him. Edwin dissipated his fireball and lowered his guard, reluctantly agreeing to comply. Roland, relieved, remarked that he preferred to avoid further bloodshed. Glancing at Cirillo, he noted it would be inconvenient if they died now. But something was amiss. Cirillo's innocent demeanor had vanished, replaced by a sinister grin. Puzzled by her expression, Roland suddenly noticed a massive gem-studded hand swinging toward him. Caught off guard, he questioned when Cirillo had completed the seal to awaken the creature. Instinctively, he raised Lamantia, attempting to block the incoming attack. The giant's overwhelming force sent Roland hurtling through the air. He crashed into the ground, the impact shaking the earth. Dust once again shrouded the entire area. A partially regenerated figure emerged from the haze. It was Edwin, who asked Cirillo if she was all right. She nodded, saying she owed him one. Edwin's massive fireball had been a ruse to divert Roland's attention, allowing Cirillo, during their exchange, to cast a spell that clouded Roland's perception. This gave her the chance to activate the giant. However, she could only control its arm, but was grateful the surprise attack had significantly harmed Roland. To be certain, Edwin told her he'd finish off their opponent. Cirillo, still wincing in pain, urged him to remain cautious. She called Roland a monster disguised as a child, and Edwin agreed, vowing not to underestimate him. In his mind, Edwin recognized Roland as no ordinary youth. He knew that failing to eliminate Roland now would make him a future threat to their organization. As the dust settled, Roland remained on his knees, reeling from the attack, but resolute that he wouldn't lose to them. In a flash, he dashed forward, vanishing from sight. Before Edwin could react, his limbs were severed once more. Roland unleashed a flurry of slashes, cutting through Edwin with precision. As if playing a deadly game, Edwin's regenerated body collapsed to the ground. Gripping Lamantia tightly, Roland demanded to know where they thought they were going. Gritting his teeth, he reminded them he'd made his intentions clear. Cirillo, stunned, watched Edwin fall in an instant. Roland reiterated that he had many questions they needed to answer. His desperate tone filled Cirillo with dread, paralyzing her. Instinctively, she tried to cast another mana shield to protect herself, baffled that an injured student could still move so swiftly. Roland's body trembled, the strain from the earlier attack taking its toll, yet he vowed not to let them escape. But as he spoke, time seemed to freeze. Roland collapsed to his knees again, his adrenaline fading fast. Struggling, he realized his body was no longer responding, pushed to its limits. Cirillo noticed his weakness. Though tempted to kill him, she doubted her victory and prioritized reporting the incident. The half-elf conjured a spell, summoning a radiant portal. Before stepping through, she turned to Roland. She declared their fight was far from over, vowing to uncover everything about him. With a venomous glare, she promised to start by targeting his family, loved ones, and friends. Threats against his family struck a raw nerve in Roland, his face hardening with resolve. He vowed silently that he couldn't let this happen, having just uncovered a lead about the angels who once destroyed the world. In his mind, if these enemies slipped away, history would repeat itself. Roland struggled to stop Cirillo's escape. He shouted desperately, pleading for her to stay. Amid his cries, a familiar voice cut through, belonging to someone wielding a white-sheathed sword radiating a deadly green aura. This figure commanded, "Stop!" And unlike Roland's pleas, Cirillo's body froze as if bound by the order. Roland turned to see Instructor Navarro, who declared she had questions for Cirillo to answer. Cirillo, stunned, sensed a predator's presence as Navarro's arrival overwhelmed the scene. The sheer force of Navarro's sword aura enveloped the area, commanding attention. With fury in her eyes, Navarro demanded to know why these people dared to harm her disciple. A heavy silence blanketed the cave. Navarro turned to Roland, praising his remarkable efforts despite his battered state. Roland managed a weak smile, marveling at Navarro's impeccable timing. She was the reinforcement Maria had summoned, more than capable of handling the situation. Roland expressed relief at seeing her, but Navarro scoffed, noting that his ability to talk meant he was fine. Her calm demeanor shifted as she fixed her gaze on the blonde half-elf. Cirillo felt a chill as Navarro declared she would deal with her first. Trembling, Cirillo recalled Navarro's ability to take a serpentine form, paralyzing foes. She couldn't fathom why Navarro was here. Desperate to flee, Cirillo froze as Navarro's hand reached for her. Navarro gripped her cheek, preventing her from casting any spells. Navarro coldly stated that Cirillo had crossed lines she shouldn't have. What enraged Navarro most was the harm done to her apprentice. From Cirillo's perspective, the scene was terrifying. Navarro's aura manifested as a massive snake, its jaws open, ready to consume her. Cirillo tried to escape, but Navarro's overwhelming presence held her captive. As her consciousness faded, Cirillo mentally apologized to those she called stars. With that, she collapsed lifelessly to the ground. Roland stared blankly at her, while Navarro commended him again for holding the enemies until her arrival. Roland knew he'd need to report the incident directly to the principal. He also asked Navarro if the future she mentioned was the model prison. Navarro confirmed it, curious how Roland knew of the place and why he was inquiring. Roland fell silent, stunned by her confirmation. The model prison, also called the Fortress of Screams, was an infamous island stronghold in the sea. Known for its brutal interrogations, it used any means necessary to extract confessions from enemies of the Empire. Seizing the moment, Roland made a bold request of Navarro. He asked if he could observe the interrogation of Cirillo and Edwin. Navarro nearly dismissed it as absurd, but Roland grabbed her hand, pleading earnestly. He stressed how crucial this matter was to him, his voice filled with urgency. Caught off guard by her disciple's intensity, Navarro was momentarily speechless. Hours after the fierce battle, healers and Imperial reinforcements arrived at Grand Carpet Doki, where chaos still lingered. Thankfully, the injured were now being tended to. Maria sighed in relief, seeing the situation stabilizing. Her condition was far better than Ansel's, who, along with Zita, was exhausted from tirelessly healing the wounded. Despite his fatigue, Ansel worried about Roland, wondering if he was all right. Just then, a voice called out, asking if someone had said his name. Maria and Ansel were shocked to see who it was. Roland, clad in tattered, dirt-stained clothes, stood before them. He greeted them warmly, commending their efforts in aiding the blacksmiths. Maria had worked tirelessly to summon reinforcements quickly. Ansel and Zita had nearly depleted their mana, saving over half the buried craftsmen. Roland asked if they were injured, but they retorted that he was in no state to ask, given his own condition. Ansel and Zita offered to cast healing spells, but Roland declined, saying he'd already received basic treatment. His attention shifted as he noticed two figures being transported. It was Cirillo and Edwin, both in critical but stable condition. Roland fixed them with a stern gaze, telling Maria and Ansel he still had important business to attend to. Hours later, at a covert meeting point known as Gringo Forest Cliff, a group had assembled in the secluded location. Navarro and Roland stood at the forefront of the gathering. Navarro, staring ahead, told Roland their escorts had arrived. The sound of massive wings flapping echoed through the air. She referred to riders on enormous bird-like creatures, the Borderlands escorts. One of the birds landed before Roland and Navarro, with Cirillo and Edwin, still unconscious and bound, lying nearby. These individuals promptly approached and offered their deference to Professor Navarro. Their mere arrival cast a shadowy, unsettling atmosphere. The figure at the forefront, evidently the leader, declared their purpose was to transport the apprehended felons. Navarro confirmed that the men sprawled on the ground were indeed their targets, cautioning the escorts about the prisoners' remarkable regenerative powers, a factor to consider during questioning. The leader, however, seemed delighted by this revelation, noting it would greatly aid their operations. He even remarked with enthusiasm that it had been ages since they'd encountered such an intriguing subject. The escorts from Lot of Lands then took Cyril and Edwin into custody, with the leader assuring Navarro they'd reach out once the interrogation concluded. With an expressionless gaze, he expressed gratitude to Navarro for her steadfast efforts in maintaining the Empire's tranquility. The escorts then departed, heading back toward LA and the prison. Roman and Navarro observed as the group gradually vanished from view. Breaking the quiet, The Sword Saint informed Roman that a week would suffice for the escorts to extract information from the captives. Navarro promised to notify him the moment she received updates from the escorts, urging Roman to stay prepared to act on short notice. Roman, or RNC, felt this was sufficient for now and expressed his appreciation to Navarro for the chance to be involved. He was now a step closer to uncovering secrets about the colossal beings that had ravaged the world in his past life. Time seemed to accelerate after that moment. With the Empire's backing, the reconstruction of Grand Carpet Doki progressed swiftly. Roman resumed his training under Navarro's guidance, with supplemental lessons focused on honing their MSI sword techniques. A few days later, in a far-off region, an event was unfolding. Within the Fortress of Screams and Lot of Lands, something significant was stirring. Echoes of cries and pleas reverberated through the corridors. Interrogation instruments were neatly arranged on a table in one of the chambers. In a room, an interrogator was engrossed in extracting teeth from a criminal, admitting he was so immersed that he nearly overlooked something important. He was referring to the arrival of expected visitors. Operations at the Fortress of Screams continued as routine. Recalling his anticipated guests, the interrogator stepped outside to welcome Roman and Navarro. The elderly man courteously introduced himself as the overseer of the newly arrived prisoners. He offered to guide them during their visit, flashing a warm smile and sharing his name, Karaka. Karaka inquired if Navarro wished to see the prisoners immediately, to which the Sword Saint agreed, eager to learn more details en route. The old man promptly turned and beckoned them to follow, while Roman maintained a stern expression, studying Karaka closely. Roman made a remark that piqued Navarro's interest, noting that Karaka seemed far too genial to be both a model and an interrogator, finding it peculiar. The Sword Saint chuckled, as this observation was common among those meeting Karaka for the first time, but she advised Roman not to judge someone by their appearance alone. The doors swung open as Karaka led them inside, unlocking further entrances. Navarro leaned toward Roman, whispering that he'd soon understand why this old man was known as Ladyland Prison's most dreaded nightmare. The corridors were dimly illuminated solely by massive, flickering torches. Karaka announced that the criminal's cell was nearby and began sharing critical details. His earlier warmth had vanished, replaced by a stern demeanor as he disclosed the first key piece of information Roman and Navarro needed. He revealed that the two prisoners belonged to a group known as the Nebula class. Navarro admitted she'd never heard of this organization before. Curious, she asked if it resembled the Calabro, but Karaka, unable to confirm, emphasized that the Nebula class was far more perilous. This group had orchestrated multiple assaults across the Empire, including the destruction of the Nalanda Granary at the Magic Engineering Research Facility in Airman. These individuals were now prime targets due to their large-scale attacks throughout the year. Roman mentally cataloged this, searching his memories from his past life, but the Nebula class was entirely unfamiliar to him. Karaka promised more details as they proceeded, but Roman interrupted with a pressing question. He asked if the captured criminals had ever mentioned terms like starlight or the star's advent. The question startled Karaka, who admitted he'd never heard those terms. Roman, caught off guard by his own inquiry, scrambled for an excuse, claiming the criminals had uttered those words during their earlier confrontation. Karaka stood there, momentarily at a loss for words. He reached for his mask, his demeanor shifting noticeably. Roman, still fumbling to defuse the awkward moment, pressed on. But as he glanced at Karaka, he noticed the old man now exuded a menacing aura, clearly irritated. Roman was taken aback. This was a stark contrast to the kindly old man from moments ago. The air grew oppressive, heavier, as Karaka donned his mask once more. He seemed embarrassed, believing he'd revealed a professional flaw during their first encounter. Karaka felt humiliated for failing to extract all vital information from the prisoners. As he unlocked the cell door, he muttered that he hadn't shown them his true dedication, vowing to exert maximum effort henceforth. Roman was stunned by the sight within the cell. He remembered Edwin and Cyril's smug expressions from their first encounter. Now their conditions were unrecognizable. Edwin resembled a drenched, defeated figure, while Cyril, barely able to see, bore severe wounds. Karaka spoke up, noting Edwin's remarkable ability to regenerate using dark magic. Holding a stick-like object, the old man asked Roman if he knew how to approach someone like Edwin, hinting that it was simpler than most would assume. Brandishing a glowing, heated piece of metal, Karaka confided his technique to Roman, explaining that relentless heat could overwhelm Edwin's regenerative abilities until they failed. The interrogation demonstration had begun, revealing why this place earned its grim title, the Fortress of Screams. With a gleeful expression, Karaka declared this was his method of bonding with criminals, jokingly calling them his closest companions after a while. Yet, this approach seemed to have lost its effectiveness, especially after Roman's earlier revelation. Disappointed, Karaka turned to Edwin, accusing the criminal of withholding crucial information. Gripping his silver hair tightly, Karaka's eyes bore into Edwin. With a chilling stare, he demanded to know if Edwin had broken their pact of mutual honesty, prompting a frantic denial from the criminal, insisting he'd shared everything. Unconvinced, Karaka pointed out Edwin's silence on the star's advent, indicating there was more to uncover. Realizing his mistake, Edwin scrambled to justify himself. Before he could explain, Karaka warned that he could shift his focus to Cyril, who, lacking regenerative powers, would suffer greatly under interrogation. Cyril, awake and trembling, clearly feared the old man's threats. In a faint voice, she begged for a swift death rather than enduring this prolonged torment, causing Roman to reflect that even his time in the disciplinary squad hadn't prepared him for such brutality. A thought struck Roman. Could Edwin truly still be concealing something from Karaka after such extreme measures? Puzzled, Roman reasoned that with the criminals' identities exposed and nothing left to lose, Edwin's silence seemed illogical. After a brief pause, Roman suggested that Edwin might not be refusing to speak, but could be unable to, despite wanting to. Karaka froze at Roman's words, visibly struck by the idea. Navarro, intrigued, leaned in as Roman elaborated, noting that some soldiers undergo procedures to safeguard sensitive secrets. Such methods often involved forbidden cursed magic, designed to block the disclosure of specific information. Karaka paused, reflecting deeply on Roman's hypothesis. Releasing Edwin, he admitted this day had been a humiliating one. First feeling betrayed by his prisoners, now overlooking something so glaringly obvious. Turning to Roman and Navarro, Karaka asked them to wait there briefly. He stressed that he needed to retrieve something to streamline the process. Moments later, Karaka returned. Roman asked what he had gone to fetch, and Karaka revealed his tool. It was a creature known as a curse die, a monster notorious for consuming curses. Karaka described these creatures as valuable allies, especially for aiding criminals silenced by curses during interrogations. His warm demeanor shifted back to menace as he approached Edwin, announcing they'd begin with him. The curse die was carefully placed on Edwin's forehead, ready to unravel the hidden truths. Karaka instructed the curse die to feast freely, and its tiny tentacles latched onto Edwin's skin. Once fully attached, a vivid purple glow engulfed the room, accompanied by Edwin's agonized screams. The creature's eye began to pulse and swell, its hue shifting dramatically, signaling the process was complete. Karaka informed Edwin that the questioning would resume, now unhindered by the curse. His first question probed the star's advent, though Edwin hesitated, struggling to respond. Words soon spilled from Edwin's mouth. The star was an eternal force, the sole salvation for the world's lowly creatures, with small lights awaiting beyond the cosmos. Cyril flinched, visibly shaken as Edwin divulged their secrets. Edwin elaborated that their organization worked tirelessly to protect their sacred goal from interference, prompting Cyril to yell desperately for him to stop. Karaka, seeking clarity, asked if something was destined to descend from the heavens. The cursed die continued devouring the enchantment, silencing Edwin, until moments later, he revealed the entities were known as the Star's Children. A heavy, foreboding atmosphere blanketed the room. Roman stood rooted, stunned by the confirmation of his suspicions. His earlier theories about these criminals were proven correct. The name of the giant he'd vanquished in his past life, Acute, flashed in his mind, undeniably linked to this revelation. Unable to restrain himself, Roman surged toward Edwin, ignoring Karaka's attempts to hold him back. His fury at its peak, Roman glared at the criminal with a vacant, intense stare. He demanded to know if the Star's Children Edwin mentioned referred to Acute. Cyril, startled by Roman's question, recoiled in shock. Edwin, bewildered, asked what Roman meant by referencing him. His eyes bloodshot, Edwin pressed Roman on how he knew of that entity. As Edwin began to say more, his face contorted unnaturally, something clearly amiss. Roman noticed the change, uncertain of what to do next. Karaka placed a hand on Roman's shoulder, urging him to step back. Swiftly, the old man conjured a crimson magic circle aimed at Edwin. A blinding light seeped from Edwin's face, and seconds later, his body exploded into countless fragments, Karaka's spell forming a protective barrier to shield them from the blast. Blood splattered across the cell, coating the walls. Karaka remarked that he hadn't anticipated such an outcome. Despite the curse die consuming most of the enchantment, Edwin's fate was sealed. Roman, frustrated, asked Karaka if such incidents were common, to which the old man replied they were exceedingly rare. Karaka explained that the curse on Edwin had two layers. The first prevented him from revealing details about the stars to anyone outside their organization. The second layer of the curse ensured members couldn't utter words tied to Ahi, triggering an explosive consequence if breached. With the interrogation effectively concluded, Karaka gripped Roman's arm, pressing him about his knowledge of Ahi. Suspecting Ahi was a closely guarded secret of the Nebula class, Karaka began interrogating Roman on how he came to know it. His hand crackled with ominous mana, ready for any trouble. With a steely glare, Karaka insisted that, as the lead interrogator, he demanded the full truth. Roman met Karaka's stare as the old man politely but firmly requested answers. The tense air softened as Roman began to explain. He claimed his knowledge was a mere coincidence. Crafting an alibi, Roman said he overheard Cyril and Edwin discussing Ahi while he was quelling the chaos at Grand Carpet Doki. Maintaining a neutral expression, he added that he'd eavesdropped on their conversation. Roman further explained that he initially dismissed the information as unimportant, but reconsidered its significance upon arriving here. He apologized to Karaka for getting carried away and disrupting the interrogation. Roman asked if his explanation sufficed to ease Karaka's suspicions. Drawing on years of experience, Karaka doubted such sensitive information could be stumbled upon by chance, sensing Roman was concealing something. Yet, studying Roman's eyes, Karaka discerned no threat to the Empire. He wondered if the fierce determination in Roman's gaze stemmed from a heavy burden or unshakable conviction. Moments later, clarity struck Karaka. Roman's eyes burned with rage toward the Nebula class. As tensions escalated, Navarro gripped her sword. A sharp green slash cut through the air. With an irritated expression, Navarro ordered Karaka to cease his questioning. The Sword Saint took it personally, fiercely defending her disciple's innocence, especially since the interrogation was happening in her presence. Karaka immediately backed down, apologizing and explaining he was merely being thorough. Lightening the mood, he quipped that he was just exercising extra caution. Karaka extended an apology to Roman, who accepted it, relieved the misunderstanding was resolved. Internally, Roman shuddered, realizing how easily he could have been detained for interrogation in this prison. Shifting topics, Karaka expressed regret over losing one of his rare curse dies, noting their resilience compared to typical fantastical creatures. Roman was stunned to learn these small monsters were so formidable, as Karaka encouraged him to examine one closely for its charm. Karaka was about to invite Roman to touch the creature when an unexpected event unfolded. The cursed die began behaving strangely. Its eye color had shifted, indicating it had just absorbed a curse. Karaka, puzzled, questioned the curse's source, as the creature hadn't even approached Cyril. The only logical conclusion was that the curse originated from Roman himself. Karaka recalled that the cursed die had been near Roman when he cast the protective spell during Edwin's explosion. Karaka called out to Roman, who responded, asking what was wrong. Without warning, Karaka placed the cursed die in Roman's hands, where it instantly latched on. The creature began absorbing an immense volume of curses, its form visibly distorting. Roman watched as the cursed die seemed on the verge of overloading. Seconds later, it erupted, bursting apart in a messy explosion. Blood and fragments splattered, leaving Roman repulsed as he demanded why the creature had detonated. Karaka, however, seemed intrigued, noting it was the first time a cursed die couldn't handle the curse it tried to consume. Growing serious, Karaka urged Roman not to be alarmed and to listen carefully. He revealed his suspicion that Roman himself was under a curse, shocking the young man. Panicked, Roman asked what he meant, prompting Karaka to inquire if Roman felt any restrictions in his daily actions. He described examples like an inability to run freely or grasp steel objects, things Roman might find himself unable to do. Roman's mind flashed to his struggle with sensing mana, a limitation he'd long noticed. Despite his attempt to mask his reaction, both Karaka and Navarro caught the fleeting expression on his face. Karaka reiterated that he wouldn't press Roman to share if he wasn't ready, acknowledging he couldn't resolve the issue himself. However, he stressed one critical point to Roman. The curse's intensity suggested it was cast with powerful, malicious intent by someone with significant skill. Hours had passed since the interrogation, and night had deepened. Karaka, Navarro, and Roman stood outside the Fortress of Screams. Karaka thanked them for their visit, promising to contact them once he found a way to lift Cyril's curse, though he warned it might take time. Navarro nodded, instructing him to report any findings promptly. Karaka's gaze shifted to Roman. He remarked that Roman seemed preoccupied, a comment that hit home as Roman was still reeling from the revelation about his curse. Roman didn't deny it, his thoughts consumed by the curse, but Karaka advised him not to dwell on it, reminding him of his status as a Filian student. Confused, Roman asked what he meant by that. Karaka spoke of a figure at the academy, someone well-versed in curses. He described this individual as the foremost expert on curse-related magic. Karaka believed this person was Roman's best hope for answers. That person was Professor Secret.